All right, good evening, everyone. This work session of the Osceola School Board is being conducted in person and in compliance with Minnesota Statute 13D.01. However, due to the current pandemic and consistent with directors of the CDC and applicable executive orders, it is not feasible to conduct this work session in person without restricting the number of persons in attendance. Consistent with current health guidance and applicable executive orders, up to 9 members of the community are able to be present in the boardroom with us tonight, and space has been made for additional 15 persons to attend on-site in the nearby cafeteria. Tonight's work session is being live streamed, and an archived recording will be available on the district website. Consistent with executive order, a face covering is required to be worn during the work session, but may temporarily be removed when speaking. The purpose of the work session tonight is to build trust and teamwork, to exchange information, and when applicable, provide direction in order to facilitate efficient and effective decision-making at regular board meetings. The outcome of this evening's work session will be that board members will receive reports, updates, and information on the 279 learning model, 2022 budget, and digital learning for all, the L4A recommendations. To acknowledge attendance this evening, and I'll ask that board members please state their name, and we'll start with Director Grady and proceed through the seating arrangement.
Tamara Grady.
Thomas Brooks.
Jackie Mosqueda-Jones.
Kelsey Dawson-Walton.
Tanya Simons.
Heather Douglas.
The superintendent's cabinet and other district administrators are seated in another conference room. Individuals will come into the boardroom as needed. I'll now ask Superintendent McIntyre to facilitate the agenda items for this evening's work session. Superintendent McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair Dawson-Walton, and good evening, board members. I just want to expand a bit to preview tonight's agenda items. So first, I'll update the board on our learning model work, and I can say right away, there's no new recommendation or any changes to the previous learning model decisions tonight. I'm just providing updated information on a few key items. Tonight, we're also going to get our first look at the budget adjustments that have been proposed and have made their way through our comprehensive LRFP process. This is an important step in the development of our fiscal year 2022 budget, which the board will approve in June. And also, we will take a look at fiscal year 2022 capital budget requests, which the board will be asked to approve at the February 23rd board meeting. I do want to take a moment to thank all of our system leaders for their hard work, along with the over 60 members that participated in our virtual platform of our long-range financial planning advisory team. They provided feedback and information and input on our proposed budget adjustments from the analysis based on our LRFP framework criteria. So I just want to say thank you to all of our team members. It was a little more than normal this year because of the virtual platform that allowed us to expand our participation. Lastly, you'll also receive our presentation on our digital learning for all recommendations. And I also want to commend the leadership of Anthony Paternos and thank all the members of his team and the partnership with district and school leaders, and for listening to the needs of our staff over the past year. During the pandemic, we've learned so much about being flexible and agile and innovative with our technology resources like never before. And based on this experience, along with the analysis of what specific changes are needed for the future, you're going to see recommendations on how to move us forward. So with that, I'll move right into the first agenda item, Chair Dawson-Walton, which is our update on our District 279 learning model. And again, as I start off, I just want to once again say to board members, thank you for all your support as we continue to weekly and daily analyze, the circumstances and kind of where we're at with our learning model efforts. Again, I don't have any new recommendations tonight, but I do have some brief comments on the most recent information we've been able to get, some of it as fresh as earlier today. I'll cover our Hennepin County and city case rate data, a little bit on our district COVID statistics, or status update on elementary staffing, and then checking in on our regional support team consultation along with vaccine and testing updates, and they'll be very brief. So right now, as of today, our county rate is at 22.5. which is an improvement again of a couple points from last week. And we really have all of our cities now under that threshold of 30, which is that key threshold for the hybrid model for secondary schools as we predicted. So that did come to fruition this week. We are quickly preparing for our transition into the board approved plan for a rolling start for in-person hybrid learning starting on the 17th for grades 6 through 8, 9, and 12, and then on March 1st for grades 10 and 11. So we continue to watch for any changes from our state agencies, and we have our required weekly consultation with MDE, MDH, and Hennepin County Public Health. Our next one's scheduled for this Thursday, February 11th. Just a real quick check-in with the addition of our grades 3 through 5 to full in-person learning when it comes to our district COVID stats. We have seen our positive cases actually just stay pretty stable and not really see a big increase there. We have seen some increase in symptomatic cases, but we've doubled the number of students in essence in our buildings and staff. And we've actually seen a little bit of a decrease in our close contact cases. So those are just kind of an overview of those trends, which I've been providing you on a regular basis. From a staffing perspective, we are monitoring in-person absences at least once a day, actually multiple times a day. And we've done, I think, a really good job, and our building leaders have done an amazing job helping facilitate being able to fill most teacher absences that need a sub. We continue to fill some nurse vacancies, and we continue to recruit custodians as the custodial leadership team prepares for secondary students and staff to return next week. We'll continue to monitor absences, especially related to any reactions to the booster vaccination beginning in a couple weeks of staff, which I'll get to in just a minute. Our last consultation with Hennepin County and MDE and MDH, really that was last Thursday. Now we have new data since then. But they verified and predict case rates to continue to improve or drop. And for quite a long time, Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park have been at the highest rate in the county. And now this week, as of today, there's 4 other cities that have higher rates than the Brooklyns do. So we've seen a little bit of a change there, mainly because we've seen a 6 to 7 point drop again this week. So really good signs there. They did mention even though volume of testing has decreased, the access to community testing has been expanded. And clearly everyone's closely monitoring, the health experts are closely monitoring the variants to the virus, and with really no clear predictions on what the future may bring with that. So we, again, don't have a lot of new information there from either the state level or county level. But in summary, our regional support team does continue to support our district's current approved learning model of in-person instruction at elementary and then hybrid, moving into the hybrid model in that rolling start for secondary. In regards to vaccine, I've told a couple of you, we had some really dramatic improvements the last couple days. So with the addition of the Hennepin County vaccine program that we were notified with on Friday and now into yesterday, out of our 3,054 regular status employees, 2,509 have been sent an invitation to sign up to be vaccinated, and that's a dramatic increase in just a couple days. So we really appreciate the efforts of the county to augment and complement the state pilot that's been going on for the last couple of weeks. So there are about 550 employees left to receive an invitation, and they will be next when we get provided with another opportunity to invite additional staff to be vaccinated. These are primarily DLA and ESC staff and a few in our adult basic ed that are all working remotely still. In addition, our bus contracted employees have received an email for vaccination as well to be vaccinated. And I know Ron and his team are working closely with our vendor to ensure bus drivers have access to vaccine as well. We'll then move into our casual employees and then our daily subs, and then reach out to employees that are on leave for that opportunity. So again, I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to also give our secondary staff a chance to get that first vaccination ahead of this week, ahead of that in-person learning and hybrid model starting next week. And it really helps us with subs because they don't have to leave in-person learning that requires a physical sub to go get their appointments made for vaccine. So the more we can get done this week, the better it helps us be ready for next week. The testing program will also be provided at each secondary site starting February 22nd, and elementary sites continue to be have testing available every other Monday. And just also a note that the community testing has expanded in the state and county level are really strongly encouraging young people ages 12 to 25 to test regularly at the community testing sites as well. So just to kind of wrap things up, really what we're seeing some really positive trends. We're seeing improved city and county level case rates. We're seeing increased access to testing. We're seeing a rapid increase in the opportunity for vaccine for staff. And all those things are really going to help us support and maintain and sustain our in-person learning efforts. So those are really, really strong indicators. As I just wrap up here quickly, I do want to take a moment to recognize the hard work of our staff and administration in each and every department at the elementary level and thank them for the successful transition into full in-person learning with last week really having all students back in. I also want to recognize the hard work and planning that is happening right now by our middle school and high school staff and leadership and their efforts to transition back into hybrid models starting next Wednesday or on the 17th. So they're doing everything they can to make that successful as well. We are really asking a lot of people right now in our staff and of our leadership, but once again, I just see continually they keep stepping up and meeting the needs of our students. So with that, Chair Dawson-Moulton, I'll kind of turn it over to you for any follow-up questions, but it's just a brief update tonight.
Thank you for that. Yes, let's start with some questions. Director Grady, I'll start with you if you have any questions or comments.
I'm just really happy to see the vaccines coming along. And I know that as a district, we're along for the ride on that process, but it really gives me hope for the safety of our students and our staff. So thank you for the update.
Director Brooks.
Yeah, I'd also just say that I appreciate all of the work the staff has done behind the scenes to stay on top of all of the changes and our new transition to hybrid. One of the questions that I have for you, Superintendent McIntyre, is about this time, about 20 points ago, we were planning to move to hybrid based on numbers continuing to decrease. Are you already starting to plan for a full in-person, knowing that in another couple weeks, few weeks, we should be significantly lower?
We have
on
been,
current trends.
yeah, thank you for the question. We have been having those kind of conversations. The guidance we got last week from Hennepin County is they do expect this to level off a bit and not continue to drop at the same rate. And right now, that threshold of 10 or lower is kind of the target, unless we get new guidance or changes, which we've learned be ready for at any time, right? So we've been having those conversations about what's realistic, so that if and when we have opportunity for input on that, we can share what's doable and what's not so doable as far as, how you bring back all students in our larger secondary buildings. So informally, we've been having those conversations and watching the trends, and we're still we'll learn more on Thursday on what's maybe looking out a bit. Our goal with vaccine ramping up dramatically is a great help, right? And in the testing programs too. So those mitigation strategies are going to really help us when that time comes. Still not knowing what that variant or variants might be at some point if they show up. So short answer is yes, we've been starting to have those conversations in anticipation if that opportunity presents itself.
Thank you.
Director Mosqueda-Jones.
Yeah, I just want to say, once again, thank you to our families and to our staff and our leaders. This has been really tough for a time. I know that it's affected trauma because of it. We've all got this suffering. Anything new, I just want to say it looks like maybe there's a light we can kind of see. And so hold on to each other, help us all work through this, and we appreciate the collaborative efforts of everyone to do what we need to do for our kids.
I think this is really great news with the vaccination updates. I mean, that's 82% of our staff having that opportunity. So just as I think about the kids returning back into hybrid and the proactive nature of that, I think that was just so critical. At the same time, we are still seeing more and more information that's continuing to support the needs for kids to be in school full time. And so I'm very anxious for us to be communicating that, telling our family stories. I think many of us received another message today from a parent. And I have to be very clear. Other districts have seen some really unfortunate events take place with their student population that we have not had to face thus far. And when I saw a message from a parent expressing their concern, their fear for what they're seeing in their child, I can't imagine if we ever receive an email from a child that we lose in this district because of the mental health crisis that's enfolding and engulfing them. So to me, I just needed to express that tonight because that particular message was really impactful to me. And I think that there's a lot of families who haven't continued to communicate with us because they don't think their voices are being heard, or that it doesn't matter, or that we're not going to take a different route and continue to say that our hands are tied. So I just want to continue to encourage you, Superintendent McIntyre, as we communicate with MDE, that we're really being proactive in sharing what we think is best for our kids and being really strong advocates with the size of our district for the full in-person options to be expanded. And I'm hopeful that we'll begin to see a change in the guidance as we did with elementary, because with the vaccinations and with the information we're seeing, it's becoming very clear. And I don't want to wait, and I don't want to hold on to get a message that's not a parent who's scared, but that a parent has lost a child. And I just needed to express that tonight. So please continue to be as aggressive as possible in communicating that with MDE. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Douglas?
Thank you. I really feel like all of you have expressed all of the sentiment that I share, so I don't really have anything else to say except for I also very strongly encourage you to continue to press upon MDE and use the size of our district as influence to make the best decision for all of our students across the state, and so that we can get that guidance to be better reflective of what experts across the nation are telling us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just echo again, everyone else. I mean, I think that, I guess my question is, Superintendent McIntyre, you sit on that committee with some superintendents across the state, and have you heard anything, or do you anticipate that the governor will, or this, MD or MDH will amend their guidelines and change them like they did elementary?
Well, we've definitely been giving feedback and input through those channels, and I haven't heard anything specifically that's been, made public at least. And I would agree with many of you that as conditions improve, we're adding pressure to continue to see maybe some guidance be updated and adjusted, because we've sure learned a lot, and there's a whole lot more mitigation that's in place now. So, those are common themes, not only through AMSD and other regional teams, but just my role on that state committee. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think it just seems that, from our last work session that we had, and then what Dr. Simon said, I mean, it's, it's very clear, where our kids need to be in school. So, thank you. All right, moving on.
Well, with that, we'll transition to our next agenda item, and I'll welcome to the podium Ron Meyer, our Executive Director of Finance and Operations. I know he's others helping him out this evening as well. So, board members, as Ron's getting ready, in a normal year on this evening, we would have our budget managers join us. That's a large group, and it's just not feasible with the way we have to run this meeting tonight. So our cabinet members and others will try to field any questions, and if there's something we just need to simply follow up with you on after tonight, we'll do that, because we have some time between now and the next meeting. So with that, I think, Ron, looks like you're ready.
All right, good evening, Chair Dawson Walton, Superintendent McIntyre, and board members. This evening's conversation around our fiscal year 2022 budget is divided into 3 parts. The first is a general overview of our budgeting process. The second is to review the budget adjustment proposals, including any strategic investments that are being brought forward for consideration. And the final element is our capital budget requests. In the interest of limiting transition time to and from the podium, I would ask that the board hold your questions until the end of all 3 of the sections. As there may be also some other budget managers that may need to come up for those additional questions. On the screen, I will show the pages of the board packet that I'm referring to, but because the print is fairly small, I would encourage board members to reference their materials that are in front of them. So let's get started with the first document, which is on page 2 of your board packet. And this is a diagram that's likely familiar to you. It's our long-range financial planning, or LRFP model, that our district uses and really holds two purposes. The first is to provide a solid, data-driven, and collaborative budgeting process, as well as a comprehensive financial projection tool. And a few things that I would like to point out in the diagram. First, as you look in the middle of this diagram, you'll see our mission statement. This is especially important as we make proposals on how we are going to allocate our limited resources as a system, and we need to make sure that we're staying focused on that mission. The gray ovals around the mission represent the work our staff, particularly our budget managers, do throughout the year to develop their budget proposals based on the strategic priorities of the district, as well as guidance from you as a school board. The greenish-blue boxes on the outside represent the school board's role in this process. Tonight, we are preparing for the work that you will see in the box that's on the left-hand side of that diagram, specifically for the board to approve the budget adjustments that are being brought forward and that have went through an extensive process through our LRFP process. The final thing that I want to highlight on this diagram is in the box on the top right-hand side. These are our guiding principles for the LRFP process. If we go to the next page, on page 3 in your board packet, this is an overview of our budget adjustment process and how specifically these budget adjustment requests come forward in that process. As I stated earlier, all budget requests that come forward should align and support the district's mission and strategic directions. Each proposal, as you will see down in number 6 on this page, would need to be proposed and evaluated using the PAIR process, or our Program Efficiency, Abandonment, and Redirection process. This ensures that there is an intentional process for evaluating the impact of any proposed budget adjustment. Also, based on the school board's guidance from back in October, all of the budget requests should be cost neutral, meaning for any proposed increase of budget capacity of a particular area, there should be an offsetting budget reduction in another area, based on an extensive prioritization process by each one of the individual budget managers. The exception to this requirement, which we introduced in our last year's budget process, was an element we called strategic investment. This is a proposal that does not have a budget reduction offset, but because of the potential impact of that request on the mission and strategic direction, the board would be asked to consider using fund balance to permanently fund that request. The last item to draw your attention on is number 7, and this highlights the fact that budget requests go through the LRFP Advisory Committee. And this committee includes many members, including community members. And this process is to seek feedback and evaluation of each one of those requests. We're going to look at some of the feedback, some general feedback for each of those requests a little bit later on. So as we switch to page number 4, this is the annual timeline for our budgeting process. As you can see at the top, our process typically starts in April of the previous year in our pre-planning phase. And then it ends in June of the next year when the school board approves the budget. You can see multiple touch points of various staff and stakeholder groups, which demonstrates the collaborative nature of this process. You will also notice that the school board has 9 different touch points with the budgeting process, both to keep you informed as well as for you to give us direction and to make decisions. So now I will turn it over to Kelly Benusa, our Director of Business Services. She's going to walk us through some of the base financial information related to our budgeting process.
So next, we're going to talk about page number 5 in the documents for this evening. So this document is the fiscal year 2021 adopted budgeted expenditures for all budgeted funds. So the long-range financial planning process has been, it's been now 10 years since it was designed. We utilize it for all of our budgeted funds except for the debt service fund, which is shown in orange on this pie chart. So the pie chart shows the size of funds in relation to each other. And if we look at the blue section, we actually have, if we look at the entire pie chart, we have $331.8 million that we budgeted for at the beginning of fiscal year 2021. And that does not include our grants like compensatory, Title I, Achievement Integration, which you'll hear about later this evening, and American Indian Education. It doesn't include our CARES or our coronavirus relief funds. And we bring those budgets to the board monthly as grant approval is given from the granting entity, which could be either a federal, a state, or a local source. And as of January, there were an additional $43 million in the General Operating Transportation Fund alone. And overall, in all of our funds, there was $51 million. So again, now if we look at that blue pie section, we see that we adopted the budget at $262.7 million. If we add another $43 million, that brings that fund total to $305.7 million. If we go on to the next page in your documents, it's our estimated cost drivers. And I just want to take a minute to orient everyone to this spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet at the top of the page has our expenditures into 4 big broad categories: salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, and others. It starts with that 2021 budget, adopted budget that we just saw on the previous slide. And then it increases the expenditures by 3%, which is our estimated trend. And so then as the document fills in, as we have information that's brought forward that we know. So this is always our starting point for expenditures, and we use that prior year trend. So of course, this year is unlike any other in that our trend has become more and more unknown to us. And so at this point this evening, we're at 2.24% known of the 3% that we have as our target. And this is similar to where we have been in previous years. So now if we move on to the base and recommended tactics for the General Operating Transportation Fund, and again, just a bit of history about this document. Again, it was a strategic priority, the long-range financial planning process, and there were 2 real outcomes that were designed in that process. The first was to build a framework. That was that first document that Ron shared this evening with the colored ovals and the mission at the center. The second was to design a long-range financial forecast model. So the format is the same for all the other funds, and it shows 9 years worth of data. So it shows 4 actual previous years, shows the current year that we're in, and then 4 years projected out. For this fund, the base is shown in blue, and this is if we do nothing. This is what results we could anticipate. So then the tactics section, which is in gray, utilizes revenue and expenditures to impact that long-term financial forecast. So we update the document at key points in the process, at the budget adoption in June, when we get year-end results, and the levy, which is usually in October or November, and then we update it for the 5-year enrollment projections and the mid-year budget adjustments, which is in February, which will be at our next board meeting. And what's different this year is that we revised this document for the November 1 enrollment due to the significant enrollment loss that we experienced this fall. So now I'm going to walk through this document. And so if we start in the left-hand corner, there's an arrow in the bottom, and it's pointing to 5%. This is our fund balance minimum threshold. So if we look at our fund balance policy on our website, it says that we have a minimum floor of 5%. So we don't want to go below that 5%. And so that's what this document's managing, so that in any given year on this document, we won't want to see that number be lower than 5%. Then if we go to the right-hand corner of this document, it points to 0% for revenue assumptions for years 22 through 2025, and then expenditure assumptions for that same time period of 3.5%. So that's what we expect if we don't do anything. But on that cost driver, we use that document to bring that down to 3%. So now as we walk through the document, if we go to the middle of the page, and the middle column, there's an adopted 2021 column. And if we walk down that column to the first yellow number, we can see that we have some adjustments in there. So now I'm going to walk through all of the revenue tactics related. And so the first one that's highlighted in yellow there is the estimated loss of students for 2021. That's from November 1st. And this model assumes that's the lost revenue that we would experience through this mid-year. And then what's also not shown on those next rows, but what's in the model, is that we would gain back 50% of those students in the second year, and then 25% of those students in the second year after, so in 2023. So we would expect that we wouldn't recapture 25% of the loss in students from this year. And so as we look at the operating referendum timeline in years in that same column, if we look down, in the year that we're in right now, we're in the 7th year of a 10-year operating referendum. And so that's important to remember, because we're going to have voter approval to either renew or increase that amount. So those will be future conversations. So again, if we look, stay up in that revenue box up there, the first row in that column, in that section, is for the revenue assumptions, which is the basic formula allowance. This model assumes that we aren't going to get an increase in the basic formula allowance in the next biennium, which starts in 2022 and 2023. So we get our funding in 2-year increments. Then the next biennium is assuming that we're going to get a 1% increase in 2024 and 2025. And the model projects that we're going to get it in the first year. So those are just our starting assumptions for this projection model. And then we have levy adjustments in the 2022 column, and those are based on the levy that was approved by the board this past December. So now if we move down to the tactics related to expenditures, we're going to stay with enrollment for a little bit. So for fiscal years 2021, the enrollment loss, which was based on November 1, so typically what we have been doing in the past is we've recognized the revenue in the year that we lose it or increase it. So we recognize that in the current year. And then the following year, what we had been doing was accounting for any increases or decreases in enrollment. So what we've done this year is we've moved that so that the revenue change is aligned with the expenditure change. So that's why you're going to see 2 numbers in the 22 column. So we're taking the loss in students from 2021 in the 2022 column, but then we're also going to recognize what we hope is that additional 50% of students coming in also folded into the 5-year enrollment projection. And as we were going through this process last year, we were anticipating an increase in students, and that did not occur. So the understanding with that item is if the enrollment doesn't happen, the expenditures aren't deployed. So in this mid-year that you'll see in a couple weeks here, that $478,000 is being recaptured again. So that's the enrollment. Then the next row down is reducing that trend, which I shared earlier was 3.5%, but we're trying to impact these results, and so we're bringing that down to 3%. So we would anticipate an additional savings of $1.3 million. So those 2 items in that column that are highlighted in yellow, we're going to see as Ron goes through the long-range financial planning process, those proposals this evening. Then as we look down this document some more, we can see the operational reductions that would be needed in outlying years. So if all of these tactics that we're talking about come true, we would anticipate needing an operational reduction in 2023, not 2022, but in 2 years out, of $5 million, followed by 7, followed by 8. So a combined $20 million. So you can see how that $20 million has been reduced from the blue section above, where we were anticipating a $29 million reduction. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ron.
Thank you. So if we move on to pages 8 and 9, I mentioned earlier that each of our budget adjustment proposals or our strategic investment proposals, they need to go through that pair process to ensure consistency in our evaluation process. So on page 8 and 9, you will see a blank version of the document that each budget manager needs to complete for each one of their proposals. Included are questions about what the intended impact of the proposal is, how it aligns with the strategic plan, what impacts it may have on other departments, and what legal or school board policies may be affected by the proposals. Also, as was added in last year's process, we have questions about how the proposal aligns with our racial equity work in question number 3, and how the budget manager is going to measure the effectiveness of this proposal, if approved, in question number 4 to ensure its success. Once the proposal is complete, the pair goes through evaluation in the department, then through evaluation with all of our budget managers in the district, and then finally through that LRFP advisory team, which I mentioned earlier, which includes our community members. At any point during the evaluation period, budget managers can make adjustments to their requests based on feedback from those various groups. Starting on page 10, we'll start to get into the actual proposals now. You'll see on page 10 a summary of all of the budget requests, budget adjustment requests. And as Kelly just mentioned, because of the significant loss of enrollment this year, these proposals include a reduction of just over $3.9 million. This reduction will align our classroom staffing with our enrollment to continue to offer the same level of services that we have previously and currently have. And I want to be clear that this is different than a budget cut, which would actually reduce the level of service that we are providing in the classroom. Also, to provide flexibility for increased enrollment next year, as Kelly mentioned, that we are anticipating 50% of those students coming back. And again, to ensure that we are providing that same level of service, we have a proposal in here for staffing contingency that will only be allocated if our enrollment warrants it. On page 10, you'll see the summary of all the budget adjustments proposed and broken out in instructional and non-instructional areas for each fund that has an adjustment request. Starting on page 11, you will see a line-by-line list of the proposals, including the summary as provided by each of our budget managers. You will see on page 11 that we have the start of our Division of Leadership Teaching and Learning proposals. These proposals include that $3.9 million reduction, with the greatest amount being in the reduction of 33.33 FTE and classroom teachers. Again, this reduction aligns our staffing with our enrollment and does not include a decrease in the level of service. The next line down from there, you will see the request for that contingency to add classroom FTE if enrollment does warrant it, to maintain that same level of service. Then if you move one line down from there, the request below that is for the transfer of 26 FTE in IT educational support professionals and moving that over to our I2T2 budget, mostly in our tech levy dollars for that transfer. This is specifically because these FTE, these educational support professionals, support our DL4A program, and that's why that transfer is being made. You will see that offset in the I2T2 section, as well as the tech levy proposals when we get to that. Finally, on page 12, you will see the reduction of 2 FTE counselors that I want to draw reference to. While this reduction, again, is based on maintaining our current level of service in this area, based, again, on that decline in enrollment that we've been talking about, our team also recognizes that responding to the needs of our students during the pandemic in this area requires a greater level of service. So while this item is listed here as a reduction for transparency purposes in our budgeting process, our intent is to continue these 2 FTE of counselor support next year through other temporary revenue sources, likely using that second wave of CARES dollars through ESSER 2 that is coming our way. So continuing on page 12, about halfway down, you'll see a a proposal for a reduction in obsolete software in our HR department. And then you see part of the transfer of those tech ESPs that I just talked about being transferred over from our DLTL team. All total, you see at the bottom of page 12 for the general fund adjustments, a reduction of over $2.4 million. And so again, the bulk of that is the $3.9 million for enrollment purposes to maintain our level of services, and then adding back in that 1.5 for a contingency in anticipation of gaining enrollment back next year. Page 13 shows our community services budget adjustments. As you know, our community ed fund has really been devastated by the pandemic, both from a loss of programming with the stay-at-home order, but also with the requirement that we offer free Tier 1 child care to our families. As Brian Severson Hall has presented in previous meetings, his team has made significant cuts to try to maintain a positive fund balance. The two requests the community ed team is bringing forth is a continuation of those efforts. Specifically, a reduction of the community ed's 50% portion of our volunteer coordinators, and the reduction of a communication specialist, which you will actually see come forward as a strategic investment for the community relations department. The total reduction for community services is just under $289,000. Then on page 14, you will see the strategic investment proposals that came forward. So if you remember to earlier in my presentation, these are items that do not have a budget reduction offset, but they have been deemed significant opportunities that align with our strategic directions and our mission. I want to be clear that these strategic investments, if approved by the board, will be permanent budget adjustments, meaning the allocation will be included in our FY22 budget, as well as all future budgets, unless another adjustment is proposed in future LRFP processes. You will see that one FTE for the communication specialist that was moved out of our community service is listed here. This position is essential to preserve enrollment marketing, internal communications, and external communications, and engagement. The second investment that's listed is for core staffing for the new 279 online. As you've heard from Anthony and Michael at previous meetings, this program will essentially be a new standalone school. So while the bulk of the staffing, like teachers and ESPs, will be provided through our normal district-wide staffing process, positions like assistant principals, counselors, social workers, and administrative assistants would not be provided, just as if we were opening a new brick-and-mortar school in the building. Also included in this is a teacher contingency to make sure that we're maintaining our class sizes in this new program, this new school, if the program grows in enrollment from today's date to the start of school in the fall. So the total request for this strategic investment is $2.8 million. So then if you flip to pages 15 through 18, you will see kind of a multicolored document, and this is the result of the feedback from our LRFP advisory team. Again, that includes those community members. It's a group of more than 60 people this year. We were able to increase it because of being able to go virtual. In this document, the green represents positive or neutral feedback on each individual request. The yellow represents an area of concern that the group may have had. And the red represents the perspective that the proposal may have a negative impact. As you can see, there are several areas that groups thought there may be a negative impact with the proposal, particularly in those areas of reduction. Specific feedback was given to each budget manager at the conclusion of the LRFP advisory meeting, and there were opportunities to make adjustments if necessary. One thing that I do want to point out is that much of the feedback around those red areas was really centered around how the needs of our families and students have increased because of COVID, which is why reductions in these areas, even if it was to align with our enrollment decline, was concerning to some of the groups and the participants. I will reiterate something that I mentioned earlier as I talked about the counselors, in that we will continue to monitor any of the areas that may need an increase of our service levels because of COVID, and we'll look to those funds to temporarily fund those things, such as that second wave of CARES funds, and there may be some additional revenue sources that are coming our way that might become available through the COVID crisis. So that wraps up our review of those budget adjustments, and then we're going to turn our attention to the capital budgeting process. So as we do that, I'm going to turn it back to Kelly, and she's going to walk us through the base and tactics for our capital budget.
So next, we're going to look at the base and recommended tactics for the capital fund. So we use a zero-based budget approach in this fund, in that if a budget manager needs capital items for the next fiscal year, a request has to be made. And it doesn't matter what the dollar amount is. And then also, we have a 0%, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, that arrow again, projected revenue assumption and expenditure assumption for fiscal years 22 through 2025 of 0%. And then if we look in the bottom left-hand corner, there's an arrow pointing to 10%. So this is a different threshold than we have in the general fund of 10% based on the needs of this fund. Again, if we focus on the middle of this document, if we go to the middle column for the adopted 2021, which is the fiscal year we're in, if we slide down that column to the gray, the tactics related to expenditures, there's a negative $169,000. This is the equivalent loss in students in this fund from a revenue perspective. And then again, just like the general fund, there's a capital technology levy that's aligned with our operating referendum. And so that is also in the 7th year in fiscal year 2021, which is the year we're in. Then if we go back up to the document and go one column over, this is the year that we're talking about, projected 2022. And if we slide down again to that first gray section with the tactics related to revenues, those 3 items in there are the adjustments to the levy that was approved by the board in December. And so those items are coming forward for increases in just other levy items, increases in our lease levy, and then increases in our capital technology levy. And so then if we keep moving down the document, down to the expenditures in the gray area, the third item, which is a negative red number, which is $144,000. This is again our loss in students that's projected for 2021. And then because we had a better than anticipated year for 2020, we're going to be able to spend more going into 2022. So we're increasing capacity for expenditures of $900,000. Again, we're trying to manage to that 10% minimum threshold for our fund balance. And so then the bottom of that column, there's an arrow pointing to 30%. So that means even with adding the $900,000, we would still anticipate our fund balance to be at 30%. So then if we look at the operational increases or reductions in this fund, they're the same as they are in the base in the purple section as they are in for the gray. And so in order to manage to that 10%, we can increase our capacity again in 2025 if all of these assumptions hold true. And that is the base and recommended tactics for the capital fund.
Okay, we're on the home stretch here. So if we go to page 20, just like our LRFP budget adjustments, you will see our capital requests are categorized by division. So first you'll see our community engagement requests at the top. And this includes a replacement equipment for that division. Then the next division down is our Division of Leadership, Teaching, and Learning, and this is broken up into 5 different departments. So the big themes here, it includes replacement and maintenance of our athletic and activity uniforms and attire, resources to support our multilingual and English language students and families, a myriad of curriculum and online resources, music equipment, media center materials, and repair and replacement of equipment in our career and tech ed. I'm not going to go through each line individually. You have them all listed there with the amounts that are being proposed. Turning the page to page 21, you will see at the top an allocation for sites, annual enrollment-based capital budgets, and district-wide capital budget. And this is really for purchasing furniture, materials, and textbooks as necessary. If we increase in enrollment, it gives some flexibility to make sure that we have the setup for those classrooms. Finally, you will see budget allocation for remodeling an Oakview bathroom, as well as the OEC kitchen, and this is to support our student service programming, as well as some software and equipment replacement for student services. Moving to our human and administrative resources team, you will see the bulk of these requests is in our school board approved operating leases. This is things such as our elementary and high school additions. At the top of mind is that Rice Lake addition that we're working through right now. Also rental of facilities and our Northwest Family Service Center. You will also see a variety of equipment replacement and contingencies for our business administration team, our facilities and custodial team, as well as our risk management team. We have also included the purchase of furniture and fixtures for spaces at Osseo Senior and Park Center Senior. Both of those sites, through our LTFM work, we're creating some flex spaces, and fixture and furniture is not included as being able to use LTFM for those, so we've included that in our capital requests. These spaces will serve as examples for other flexible learning spaces as part of our Building a Better Future process. Finally, you will see several license fees in our risk management department, as well as in our information and instructional technology, or I2T2 team. You will see those on page 22. So the total for our operating capital is just over $8.9 million. And then last but not least, I'll draw your attention to pages 23 through 24, and this gives us details of our capital project technology levy budget request. Again, this is part of our DL4A plan that you're going to hear a little bit more this evening. You will see that there are a few teaching and learning requests at the top of our tech levy, including some online resources and online media center resources, and also a portion of that multilingual communication tool that we saw in the capital, operating capital. The rest of the requests are from our I2T2 team, and these include staff to support our technology initiatives, as well as devices for our students and our staff, and all of the supporting equipment, software, and security components to maintain the program. You will see on page 24 that the total amount for our tech levy is just over $7.8 million. So with that, before turning it back to Chair Dawson-Walton to facilitate any questions, I'll just say that some of the next steps include bringing forward our fiscal year 2022 budget adjustments, as well as our fiscal year 2022 capital budget to the school board for approval at the February 23rd board meeting. And then we will work through the process at finalizing our budget, and we will bring it back to the board in June with the comprehensive budget for fiscal year 2022. So with that, I will turn it over for any questions.
All right, thank you. Director Douglas, I'll start.
I have a lot of questions. Okay, I am going to start with my questions on the pair process and the changes or requests that are being made. Obviously, there's a lot of concern, which you've highlighted already, about the reduction of the 2 FTE counselors. And you had spoke briefly about using another temporary revenue service such as the CARES funding. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so as part of the stimulus that was passed at the federal level in December, it included some resources and money that will flow through to schools through the state. So we are still gathering information. We did have some information that was presented to us on Friday to business managers, and we're working through that process. It'll look similar to our first round of stimulus dollars, where there's some set criteria that we need to use it for, specifically to respond to the impact of the pandemic. And so there is quite a bit of flexibility for school districts with that. And so as we look at that, it's just over $12 million for Osseo area schools. And so with that, we will be looking at some of those areas that we really need to increase our level of services on a temporary basis, really to respond to the pandemic and the needs of our students and families through the pandemic, to prioritize those dollars. And so that's one of the areas, those counselors that we had identified. Again, we wanted to bring it forward in full transparency because it is a reduction to really align our staffing with our enrollment, but we also recognize that there is an increased level of need in that particular area, which is why we've already kind of suggested that we would use some of those CARES dollars for that. We're still looking at some other, there might be some additional funds that could be coming to the school districts, but there's just not a lot of information on that at this point.
So I guess in simpler terms for the folks that are listening, it sounds like what you're saying is that we're not necessarily eliminating 2 counselor positions, but we're paying them in a different way with CARES funding. That's the intent.
That is correct.
But we don't actually know for sure if we can use that money for that yet?
We can use that money for, we
Okay.
should be able to use that money for school counselors, yes. But again, that is temporary funding.
Right.
So that will allow us to respond during this time, and then we'll have to continue to evaluate the needs moving forward, and it potentially could be a budget adjustment or proposal that we would bring through the LRFP, or if enrollment does go up, it might justify from an enrollment perspective to add those counselors back in from an enrollment perspective.
Okay. And is that also true of the 3 FTE special education teachers, or is that different?
I think that many of those reductions based on enrollment, our team will have to evaluate where those needs are for the greater level of service, and that's really across the board with our system. And so, while I can't say for sure because we haven't had some conversations about that specifically, I do think if there is a need for a greater level of service, we'll certainly have the conversation about whether CARES dollars make sense for that.
But right now, that conversation has not been had. So at this time, we're talking about simply eliminating 3 full-time special education teachers based on our enrollment.
Correct.
I have a really huge concern about that, knowing that our special education departments are already maxed out. People are barely able to do the work that they need to do. They have too much work, too many caseloads to be able to adequately, according to our families, meet the needs of our students. And I understand that from a budgetary standpoint, this might make sense, but I don't think it makes sense for our students and our families to eliminate these positions.
And again, from an enrollment perspective, the caseload should not change for special ed teachers based on that reduction because it is less students. Again, I do think that from how we're responding to the impact of COVID, that we can certainly consider the needs as it relates to special ed teachers as we look at allocating those resources from ESSER.
Okay. I feel like there's a lot I could say about why that doesn't make sense to me. The special education teachers are already, their caseloads are too high. They're not able to adequately meet the needs. Even if their caseloads remain the same, that's still going to be a problem going forward. And I can just say right now, I will not be able to support this. I'm not going to support reducing 3 FTE special education teachers unless we have identified specific funding to reallocate to that.
And I'll turn it over to Kate Emmons and Michael Lehan to talk a little bit more about those caseloads and specific the requests as it relates to our enrollment decline.
Okay.
Good evening, Board Chair, team, thanks. So I hear you have questions and concerns about the reductions that I proposed for the Student Services Department. And I understand these were not easy, and they certainly weren't something I was jumping for joy about at all. But we do have a reduction in numbers. And so the ratios that we're looking at for our caseloads are not increasing. So generally, we have a staffing assumption model, and in that staffing assumption model, we say 1 to 19 for caseloads for our secondary, 1 to 15 or lower for our caseloads for our elementary, and then depending on other considerations, somewhere between 17 and 19 for our middle school students as well as a ratio for caseloads for students in our resource program. As you know, and some of you being new may not know, that we have a Skills Connect and a Strategies program. Those are self-contained programs, and those have much lower ratios, and we're not looking to increase those either. We have had a reduction in numbers, and therefore these reductions are somewhat reflective of the reduction. I didn't take it all the way down because we're expecting half to come back. So actually the cuts are not to the fullest that they could have been. Based on our reduced enrollment, they're about halfway because we're expecting half to come back. So I agree, losing teachers, losing FTE is like, oh, don't do that. But at this point, financially responsible, that's what I was asked to do, is to right size, and that's what I did.
So do we know how many of the students that we have lost enrollment-wise require special education services?
So I don't know that. I just know that I get a report every day about the numbers of students in our system that receive special education services. And we were up at one point above 3,200, and there just today it was at 3,068, which is actually 46 more than it was 5 days ago. So I think they're coming back slowly. So the caseloads are still well within those parameters because I didn't cut to the bone.
Mm-hmm. So a really big concern I have is how often we've spoke about how difficult it is to find highly qualified educational staff
Yes.
for our special ed services, and reducing those staff members in a time where we are expecting kids to come back, and we're expecting kids to come back with greater needs than they had before. Reducing in these areas seems irresponsible.
So greater needs, because students with disabilities, this is driving me a little nuts. Do you mind if sorry, it's hard for me to talk. So I get, but students with disabilities have always had high needs. So I can't say that they're greater as far as in terms of their disabilities and the services that we provide in that way. Now, I heard you have concern, because I was listening, about the counselors that were being cut as well, and that was again a right size, which is what I was asked to do. And I heard as well that you have a different solution for that, so I was glad to hear that as well. So, so if we have a caseload of 1 to 15 and a gen ed teacher has a caseload or a class size of 30, or they see 120 students, the special ed teacher, in my opinion and my experience, has been that they get to know those students well, and they're able to navigate the needed services for those students. So because we're not raising the caseload number to an unreasonable number, 1 to 25 or higher, I still think that the teachers that we have will be able to navigate those relationships and the services that the students need. Now, getting highly qualified teachers, I'm with you on that, as would be anybody who has ever tried to hire. We do have a certain number, and Laurel could speak to that, about how many people are retiring, and I know that we're not cutting more than the number of people that are retiring or thinking about retiring this year. So I don't think that there would be an actual cut of a person, but I can't promise that because every school gets the cuts and then they have to see what's within their building, and then we take it to a district level, and then say, we have a teacher here, we need a resource teacher here, and that's where, at the district level, I start getting in and saying, oh, wait, don't let them go, we have a place.
So, one thing that has been brought up to me many times throughout the course of this year, calendar year, while we've been in mostly distance learning or hybrid learning, is families who are frustrated because they want an IEP meeting, they believe their child is struggling, they're not necessarily getting them in a timely manner, or they're not receiving the services that they feel are required, and most of the time, it's a condition of the environment that we're in, not necessarily that teachers aren't following through on protocol and maintaining, right? It's just because this is what's happening. But it feels like they're not getting their needs met. What I'm wondering about is how many new students have entered into special education services during the pandemic, and how does that compare to previous years?
That I don't know off the top of my head. I do know that we have ongoing evaluations, and even during distance, we kept ongoing with our evaluations. We had a backlog from last year when we were out completely and not able. So we did a work group this summer for evaluations where we pulled a team together, and then anybody who was on a list to have been evaluated, we did that all through the summer and then into the fall. So I just asked today, I was in a group of people asking if they felt like there was psychs, if there was a backlog. I was talking to a few psychs, and they said it would be a good idea to continue with that same work group this summer, just in case there's anything that's been coming up over this year. So, but the numbers, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I don't know. But if you want it, I could maybe figure it out. I'd have to think about that, like how I would figure that out, but yeah.
I guess what I'm getting at is I feel like we need to, and I'm not saying that you haven't done this, because I know that you did not want to cut any of these staff members, right? But as a board, I think that before I can comfortably support this, I'm going to need a whole lot more information, because I really strongly feel that this is not the right decision for our students in our district. And that's just where I land on that. So I appreciate you answering all my questions. Thank you.
So the special ed budget is people. So we do get the grant, we do get reimbursement for that, but it's not like I have, in order to right size for the number of students that we lost, there's not enough supplies in the world to cut that. So it does come down to people, because really that's what the special ed budget is.
So what I would propose, and I don't know how exactly this works, but that we reevaluate that from a higher level, that we make room for these positions to remain in the budget.
Superintendent McIntyre, you're going to say
Yeah,
something?
I'd just ask if maybe, Kate, you can pull up data that compares us to other metro districts. So my experience in this arena is our caseloads are at or better than many in the metro.
Oh, yeah.
We've been very strongly staffed, which has been a great thing for us. And then also, maybe you can confirm that. I don't know when's the last time that's been looked at. Also, we are working in conjunction with EMO on a task force that's looking at workload reduction as well. So it's how do we help our current staff work smarter and create more instructional time for students, and by minimizing paperwork, meetings, and those other things. So that is a partnership effort with EMO. So it's not always how many people, it's how smart and efficient we can work in some of these areas, and we've made that commitment and are launching that task force. It was actually going to start a year ago, but we had to wait. So that's another component of working smarter, not harder, in some of these issues around. And then the last comment is, we are very cautious about, the interruptions in learning that we've talked about, not attributing that to a disability issue when it's just students simply haven't had instruction. So we're going to be really thoughtful about moving into in-person and into next year. Students need more instruction, and maybe not coming from special education, because it's not a disability issue. It's a lack of instruction issue for many and many of our students as we've stopped and started our different models. So we've been working hard in our tiered system of support and how do we support our general education teachers to really focus on core instruction moving forward. So these are variables around the fringe on this particular topic, but in the end, if these are reinstated, we got to find cuts somewhere else. So that's where we'll, if the board directs us to do that, we will do that. But we first came forward with our best analysis and recommendation across the board, across departments, and it's been vetted through many, many meetings and many, many staff and a 60-member team too. So we'll follow your direction on that. I think, keep that context in mind. And Kate, if you can follow up with information that Director Douglas has asked for, that could probably help give additional context to this particular cut.
I mean, I think this is really good discussion because, we've said it really all along during this year, like, we want to hear, what are some creative ways that we can really solve some of these issues that we're talking about. And Director Douglas, I really do agree with your comments because, even when I look at that, the counselors and special ed, when we continuously hear over and over again, these are the areas that we really need to have some support in. And I think that it's hard. I think you're doing this amazing job at trying to anticipate in an environment where, it's not a normal year. It hasn't been a normal year. So we still don't know what the impacts are on our students because we're not even fully back in our buildings yet. So I really do concur with just looking a little bit more into this to see what are the alternatives, like the CARE solution and what that looks like. So, all right, Dr. Simons.
I had the opportunity to participate in the committee as we reviewed those, so I don't have a lot of questions. I do really appreciate that we really analyze the impact, that we have this process in place. I think while it can be difficult to say we need to make reductions, I think it's been done thoughtfully with clarity around what the facts are and what that means for various ratios and class sizes. So I know that we move up and down with adding dollars, with removing dollars, and that means staff to support the enrollment that we have. So I do appreciate that effort. And I, again, have to say that I really appreciate our finance department. Time and time again, as we've had, every time we look at the budget, every time we have an audit, the really strong fiscal discipline and the processes behind that you have in place to make the best decisions possible really strengthens our district. And just as we saw with some of our bond rating, with our ability to capture low interest rates, this is just part of that entire infrastructure that ensures this really good, sound financial base that we have. Because as other districts navigate COVID and navigate the potential for funding gaps going forward with the state level picture, we are very well positioned to that. So that's for the benefit of each and every student. And so I appreciate the work that your department does and the experts that we have, and Kelly, all the work that you do as well. So appreciate that. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for that context that you're part of this. Director Mosqueda-Jones.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that the cuts that we're talking about in staff, is that based on that we are going to recapture 50% or on the current enrollment number?
That is based on the enrollment projections for next year, which includes the 50% recapture.
Okay.
Yep.
So if we captured more than that, we would definitely be hiring more people back.
Then we would use that contingency that we have in place.
Perfect.
That we proposed as well, yes.
And so I did a little math here, and it looks like with the decline in enrollment, that would be 6 FTE special ed difference, so that our special ed caseloads might actually get a little better. Is that true? Maybe? I don't know. Okay, so I do agree. I've worked in education for a very long time, and our special ed teachers are overwhelmed with paperwork and anything like that. So I continue encouraging at the legislature to work on cutting the paperwork for them, for sure. And then I just want to, because I asked a lot of questions beforehand, and I appreciate all of your answers. What I'm hearing today, though, is any chance that we get to use any additional funding that may come our way, we are going to concentrate on mental health and special ed. Do we have like a list of, these are our priorities of what we're going to be concentrating on, I guess?
So the legislation actually laid out some criteria for
Yep.
school districts to follow, including mental health, but also learning gaps for
Got it.
students, looking at things like summer school and some additional resources that way. They've specifically focused, that's new to the legislation from the first round of ESSER. And so those are all of the components that our team has to go through and fully understand what does that mean and what are the needs across our system that relate to that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Director Brooks.
Yes. So I had many of the same questions, and I actually want to thank Director Douglas for getting to them before me. I'll have some questions sort of along the same lines, but I won't ask you about special education. One of the first questions that I have is the 50% for 2022 and then 25% in 2023. What is that projection based off of?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as we looked at where we are losing students and what grade levels that we are losing students, and we saw this in as the board looked at the enrollment projections in December, in our December meeting, a big chunk of them left at the kindergarten level. And so as we looked at where they were going, it's clear from the data, some assumptions that we can draw is that many of them didn't go anywhere, and parents just held them out of kindergarten altogether. So we are making an assumption that we're going to get some of those back, as well as anecdotally, we've heard many of our principals have actually reached out to families that did not enroll, or maybe were enrolled and they left this year, to get some feedback in terms of, are they planning on returning? And there is some sense from a lot of families that they are planning on returning. And then finally, as part of it, that's not really related to COVID, but it will play into those enrollment projections. We do still have plans for, although it has changed a little bit with the city of Maple Grove, the northwest area of the district in Maple Grove is still planning on new developments that could yield some additional students as well. So those are kind of the assumptions that went into that 50% returning for next year and then 25% the following year. We didn't include any additional growth in our projections outside of that 50% and 25% to account for that enrollment growth in that northwest Maple Grove area.
So you actually sort of talked to one of the points that I wanted to make from that question, which is that I don't know a lot of organizations that can essentially lose millions of dollars and not come up with some sort of aggressive tactic to recoup some of that loss. So the example that you gave of principals actually reaching out, I think one of the questions that I have is, is there a process in place or a plan in place to make sure that principals across the district are doing that same thing, to actually reach out to families and get them back next year? I do think it's important that we be a little more proactive, just given where we've been this last year. So.
And we do, and maybe Barb Olson can speak to it, we do have, as part of our kindergarten enrollment process, there is a process for school staff actually reaching out to families as well. And so that certainly will be really focused on this year as well. And we have seen, just from some of our early evidence of enrollment for next year, that we have had an uptick in the amount of kindergarten enrollment for next year already, even at this early stage.
Director Brooks, too, we did do an virtual enrollment fair this year for kindergarten, which was a different effort. And at this point in time, we have 3 times the amount of kindergarten enrollments we would have had a year ago. So we think we're getting some traction on some of those efforts to try to, along with, the learning model shifts and the appearance of more in-person learning happening, I think, but really trying to be very intentional about marketing and showing the offerings we have in kindergarten and the experiences that we can offer. So it seems to be resulting in higher enrollment at this point in the calendar.
Thank you. So I have just a couple more. So along the line of questioning from a little earlier, the 33 FTE teachers, if I'm looking at this correctly, we would get 12 of those back through DLA. Is that correct? So it would actually be a reduction of 21?
Through the 279 online?
Yes,
Is that what you're
279,
saying?
yes. Yep.
Michael, I don't know if you want to speak specifically to that. I think that's the 12 FT. What, the 12 additional though in the, I'll let you speak. Oh, that was, I think that's the contingency. Is that the contingency that you're talking about? So that's specific to if we experience, we're going to staff to what has currently enrolled in 279 online for next year, just like we do staffing across the entire district based on the enrollment projections for next year. If we get more enrollment in 279 online, rather than pulling from buildings at the late hour, this staffing contingent, that 12 FTE, will be able to ensure that class sizes remain at our target level for the 279 online. So it is possible, if we allocate those resources, those would be 12 additional FTE, potentially from those 33 that we reduce for enrollment across the district.
Okay. And then one of the questions, just looking at forecasting, and this is part of that same question, do we know and can we get information on where those teachers are coming from, the 33 FTE currently projected? And I know that you already mentioned that this is based on reduction in enrollment, but just wondering how it's actually impacting us on a school level.
Who wants this one, BJ? Michael?
You know, and I can, as we're kind of transitioning, I can offer up too, we do, that can be impacted by retirements or staff just leaving for other positions in other districts. So we often have many, many openings and may not really, you know, those maybe naturally happen just because of it, some of that staff movement that can happen in our system with, well, I don't know what our exact number is, but let's just call it over 1,500 teachers. We just have openings right through movement and every year. So I don't know if that's buys BJ a little bit of, or Michael, those things always come into play every year.
We're waiting
as
for
staff
Laurel
move.
to see if she appears magically. I should have brought a genie or something. So we go through a transfer process. And so certainly, as we think about just who is the most senior, the people that aren't, normally they're the ones that are going to get cut. As Kate also talked about, we have retirement. So what is the total impact of those 33? And then we go through a first round transfer, second round transfer, and we try to find placements. Again, this year, our district, to make sure, because one of the pieces that came up in the LRFP process was the fact of some of our desire to recruit and retain staff of color. And one of the things that we're looking at is to offer some pocket contracts to make sure that we're holding back to meet some of our outcomes. And if there are some openings, we want to make sure that we fill them with some of the talented individuals that we already have inside the system. Yes. That's all I got.
Are you waiting for somebody?
No,
Okay.
I wasn't sure if Laura, if there
Laura
was
was gonna
any more other questions I could speak to.
Do you have any other questions?
So the last one was just on the capital tech levy. Not sure who would be best to answer that one, but I think I calculated about 600,000 in maintenance costs for hardware and software. So my question is just on maintenance, just maintenance with the new sort of one-to-one model. If you could talk to kind of short and long-term impact of just maintenance costs of technology.
Yeah, so when we look at our one-to-one program in particular with students, we have a very intentional we're moving from a 3-year to a 4-year cycle on all the hardware. So we continue to maintain current and fresh hardware. Chromebook devices, we actually repair in-house. So we have a supply budget and maintenance budget that we have around that, as well as working with families and doing bill back when there's intentional damage that occurs with them. In terms of support, which I'll answer the question now, but I was going to reference it in my next presentation. But as we've expanded our one-to-one program and evaluating the impact that that's had on our team this year and supports and resources, we do actually have the addition of a additional tech support specialist level 2 in the tech levy budget. And then looking at, still trying to understand what is the long-term need, we'll be bringing in 4 additional tech ESPs through the additional ESSER funds that are coming in that will support for next year. And then we'll evaluate if that needs to continue, how we move that in strategically into a long-term source after next year.
Thank you. I guess I'll hold any additional questions until the next presentation. Thank you.
If I may, Chair Dawson Walton, I'm going to have Barb Olson give a little bit of additional data on our kindergarten enrollment and some of the efforts that we have, because she's got some good data to share.
And it's encouraging. So here's some data, very recent. The virtual kindergarten information fair you are familiar with. It is truly being a model for other school districts. We're getting calls regularly on it. And as of February 1st of the current year, we had 317 confirmed enrollments for kindergarten, which is higher than any of the 4 previous years for enrollments received by that same date in previous years. Kindergarten fair participation, which is measured through our new website capabilities. You fill out a form to participate, to access it. We had 417 as of February 1st, which is higher than any previous comparable per family participation rate. We typically estimated about 300 to 350 family units participating in the in-person fair. We mailed 1,700 kindergarten fair kits in early December, and we send out almost 4 a day. So there's still high interest in that program. And in the last 2 weeks, there were 123 enrollment inquiries submitted through the website, and of those, 40% were for kindergarten. So it's promising.
Yes.
And we still have to work really, really hard. So that, I'm going to make a connection to another item on your budget plan, which is transferring the cost for the communication specialist who has done all this work. So it does take an investment of time. People are service, and we're encouraged by the results.
It's very encouraging. Thank you. All right, Director Grady.
It's a tough act to follow, Director Brooks here, but I just wanted to thank everybody for your expertise and all the work that you do in keeping us financially responsible as a district while trying to manage all of our increasing student needs. I also was fortunate to have the opportunity to participate in the PAIRS process, so I kind of have a little bit of understanding about how something works. And I also share Director Douglas's concerns about staffing for special education and mental health. I think many of us are hearing anecdotally, and many parents are experiencing issues with concerns with our children at this moment in time. And, you know, starting with the pre-pandemic reality where there were concerns over caseloads for both special ed and mental health needs, I am wondering how we think about that as we plan going forward, because whether those issues are initiated by the pandemic or exacerbated by the pandemic, I'm not really sure how we're wrapping our heads around what that will look like. I'm pleased about the enrollment picking up in kindergarten, but that's also a whole nother set of kids that we haven't seen. And I'm wondering what that's gonna look like in the kindergarten classroom, because we're gonna have a big age gap. I was in a kindergarten classroom last week, and these kids are so adorable and so great and all over the place developmentally. And I think that that might also pose some challenges going forward as we try to figure out how to assess and meet those needs. And so I'm wondering if we could have another work session or some more information as you all are working and planning on this about how we set up and understand, because it's really complicated. You know, did it happen before the pandemic? Did it happen because of the pandemic? What situations have changed, even with kids returning back into the classroom. I was in a couple other classrooms in elementary school this week, and what those kids were, where they were before they went home is different than where they're at right now. And it really takes that personal intervention and connection with students, as well as the assessment strategies to kind of figure out how to sort out all of those problems. So that's my request, if we can talk about this, table this and talk about it more as we work through this process to understand the impact of this wonderful pandemic experience.
Director Grady, my comment would be, we're going to be continually assessing needs as students come back and we learn more about what the impact of this is, and it's going to be a long-term effort. It's not going to, we're going to be reevaluating consistently. We'll be sitting here next year thinking, we got to make another shift. What did we learn between now and then, as far as what the needs of our students are and our families are? So it's, I made a note here too to, Ron, you haven't really covered it, but we know there's been money earmarked in the state budget, but we can't rely on that right now, right? We don't know what's coming or what the final decision will be on that, and that comes later. We have to do our forecasting now. So there's been really good dialogue around some of these areas that we hope we get some additional support financially, not just only from federal, but from state. But as we know, there's a lot of hoops to go through, and in the end, we don't know what that final budget is as the negotiations end up sometimes in special session, right? Well beyond even our June deadline. So we've been watching those things closely. We are hungry for those additional resources to invest in. And, but right now we can't bank on any of that at this point, as you saw in our projections. So I don't know if Ron, you want to add to that in any way, but.
Appreciate your sensitivity to that issue, because, we're all experiencing that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, we'll continue to also look creatively at the needs through the pandemic, whether it was pre-pandemic or because of the pandemic, and try to align that with various resources. So, for instance, the ESSER dollars, both the first round and the second round both have deadlines that we have to use the resources. So we'll look creatively on how do we use those resources with any that may come from the state or additional federal funding as well, to make sure that we can really utilize those to the greatest impact and effect for the needs of those students that we identify.
I thank you, and I appreciate that. I think that, our teachers and our staff are our greatest resources. Those are the people that our students need to connect with, and I think that's why there's a sensitivity around losing some of those staff. Because as you all know, they're really essential for our children right now, and with everything in flux, I think we need to just keep that in mind.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go down one more time just to see Dr. Douglas.
I do have couple more questions. One of them is related to the operating capital budget, capital request budget allocations on page 21. I am wondering specifically about our outdoor classrooms and where do those fall into this and maintaining them?
I would say it'd probably be a combination, Director Douglas. Certainly sites may, for those that have outdoor classrooms, may utilize some of their capital dollars or other resources that they have at the site level, and our facilities team as well certainly would provide resources for upkeep in some of those elements. So I don't know if BJ or anyone else has any additional comments, but did I hit it? Yeah, you got something? I got it, okay.
So outdoor classrooms are maintained through multiple funding streams, is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct, as well as some potential grants that some of our sites have been able to acquire as well for some of those outdoor classrooms.
Okay, the reason I bring this up is because I know that in the past, we've had to have parents come in and clean up those outdoor classrooms. So I feel like that's something that should not rest on volunteers from our community, but it's our responsibility, if we're gonna be providing this space, that we maintain it properly.
Yeah, and we have had some conversations in the past about some of those outdoor spaces, and that's why it's really important, and we've worked hard to work in coordination with our sites and our facilities team to make sure that we're on the same page about what we're requesting and making sure that it's sustainable into the future, so that we don't just get the grant money, put something in, and then we can't sustain it through our facility team. So we are working very hard to align that with our facility team to make sure that those things are taken care of.
Okay, thank you. And my last comment, I guess, well, actually, I have a question for Laurel. Is she out there? Hi. Thank you. I think that you're probably going to be the most qualified to answer this, but when we're talking about the special education and the counselors, the FTEs, there's been conversation in other areas about like the 33 FTEs and moving people around. Can you talk specifically to open positions right now in special ed or counseling services? Do we have open positions that would kind of balance out these potential losses or not?
I believe we have an open position in special ed, particularly in DLA. I don't know that it is a long-term position. I believe it's for a leave position right now, so it wouldn't necessarily have any impact on next year's staffing. However, what I can tell you is that on any given year for the past 3 years, we've had over 20 openings in special education teacher positions alone. And so if that were to happen and we had to reduce 2, we would just have 2 less open positions. It wouldn't necessarily impact any current special ed teacher in terms of a cut. So the first thing we do when we're considering cuts is we take out any open positions and we eliminate those. Then we look at, do we have to cut more? And then we would have to impact our probationary teachers first.
Okay, so that, I guess that's, you're kind of leading into my next question, which is about our ability to hold certain staff members harmless. And there's a lot of, I think Michael Lehan was talking about, you know, the same type of thing where we will have to kind of go to those probationary teachers first, but that we want to prioritize. I can't remember the exact language that you used, but like maybe moving them into a different bucket for our teachers of color because we are prioritizing representing our teachers reflected in our students and vice versa. Can you kind of go into that a little bit for me?
So a number of years ago, we negotiated in our teacher contract a provision where HR can hold up to 15 positions, and I'm going to use the word harmless, that's not the specific language in the contract.
Right.
But basically what happens is when a building principal comes to a staffing meeting, if they have more reductions and they have a phenomenal probationary teacher that meets the criteria for moving our mission forward, they can say to HR, we've got this phenomenal teacher and we want you to consider them being one of those 15 people that we can then hold. And what we do is we pull them up, we put them in a shallow pool, is what we call it, and then we offer them a pocket contract. So what that means is you're guaranteed a job. We can't tell you right now if it's at a particular building, it will be within your licensure area, but that's what we tell them so that we can secure them in our system. And then once the voluntary transfer round 1 happens, an involuntary transfer happens, right after that, then they're placed into a position with input from them as well as the building principal so that we're trying to match interests in terms of where they want to teach and what area they want to teach. And then we open up to voluntary round 2, which is our probationary teachers for transfer as well as outside candidates. So we can hold 15 people, up to 15 people harmless from getting cut, and then they don't have to wait until May. They know they have a job the entire process. They just are not exactly sure where. So we feel like that's a really strong benefit that we've negotiated in our contract in order to save teachers that are phenomenal and are aligned with our mission statement.
Okay, thank you for expanding on that. I don't think that some of our newer board members have been a part of that conversation, so I thought it was important that they hear that. Also, could you, I think I might have missed it, how many special ed teacher openings do we have right now?
I can't tell you exactly because I
Like-
haven't been in there since Friday, but I think I
Roughly?
remember a couple.
Okay.
And they were long-term sub-positions in DLA from what I can recall. Kate's shaking her head yes.
So, just to be explicitly clear, if we proceed with the reduction of the 3 FTEs, we could be potentially losing 3 special education teachers. Not just openings, but actual people.
Only if we had 0 openings and 0 retirements or leaves of absence or people not returning
Okay.
in special education. And that goes back to my point about for the last 3 years, we've had 20-plus openings. Because people are moving for whatever reason.
Sure.
They retire. So we always have openings. And if that bears fruition, which I believe it will, we would not be cutting an actual person due to a reduction in force.
Okay. But you don't know if we have any openings right now?
But so the openings that we have right now aren't related to next year's staffing.
Got it.
We won't know that until after
We
we
do
do
the
the whole
thing.
staffing process.
Got it. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Sure. The other thing I just want to add is that we, every year, are in conversation with Education Minnesota about pocket contracts for hard-to-fill positions. Special education and EL
Yeah.
are 2 of those areas. And so we are always looking at our student teachers and anybody that we can do at a job fair. If we have good candidates that we meet there, we try to hire them early. So we don't ever have a lack of openings in special education.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, Director Simon?
Okay, just one point, so as we think about making the investment in the online school, those additional requirements, I think it just is going to increase the urgency of continuing that broader capacity conversation. So as we think about students shifting into online, freeing up capacity in our brick and mortar, growth in new development areas of the district and declines in other areas, I think that's going to be something that's more urgent for us to begin to evaluate. So while I think about supporting, the investment for the online school this year, I think we have to consider what the capacity implications and strategic implications are and begin to have that conversation and really bring that forward. Because I don't want to have incremental expenses that continue to be carried forward if there's opportunity for efficiency elsewhere in the district. So everything is so fluid right now, and I think we touched on this a little bit in the ECMAC committee, but I'm confident that we'll have those. I just have a greater sense of urgency that we begin to plan for that and think about that and ideate on that in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Director Simons. And as you mentioned, our ECMAC team just last Monday started having conversation. We had a presentation from Anthony and Michael on 279 online. We also had some conversation about the growth in the Northwest Maple Grove area. We had a meeting with the city of Maple Grove last Friday to get some more information on that. So we are already starting to really dig into some of that. But a lot of the data won't come until we see who shows up for school in what buildings or virtually next September or this September.
All right, thank you. Director Mosqueda-Jones.
Is Laurel still here? Sorry, Laurel. I just want to get an idea of how many FTEs do we generally lose for retirement and movement every year, just in general?
In general, what I do know is that 33 to 34 on average teachers retire a year.
Okay.
I don't have an exact count of how many leave, move out of state, change careers. That I can't tell you for sure. And what I can tell you is that 33, 34 has been the average. We've done a few early retirement incentives, which the number scales way up, so I'm not including that in my average. And then 2 years ago, we had 50-plus teachers retire. So I'm seeing a trend of more teachers retiring than our average has been in the past. Our retirement announcement date, they have to submit by March 1st. So right now, we don't really have a strong indication of what we're going to get. I did talk to Kelly Wilson last week. They had a meeting. They always have a meeting every year offering information about retirements, and they had a number of people attend, and it was about the same that he has had in years past. So if that gives us any indication, it should trend around 34 teachers for retirement.
And so, thank you, I appreciate that.
And I don't know if it helps you, but we have upwards of 150 to 180 new teachers at New Teacher Workshop every year.
Right.
And that could be part-time positions, full-time
Right,
positions.
right.
So that's almost, that's 5 times what we have in retirements.
Absolutely. My biggest concern is always losing talented teachers who reflect the demographics of our students. And so it feels like to me that we should be able to do that this year.
And I don't know how deep you want me to go, but we have modified our teacher transfer process to do 279 online first, so that the brick and mortar probationary teachers are less impacted. So we can staff 279 online first, and then the buildings don't have to do the cuts and then be reactive and try to fill later. So we're trying to be strategic in keeping as many phenomenal teachers as we can, because we know there's a shortage of teachers, and we certainly don't want to lose more than we have to.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, Director Brooks,
No additional questions at this time.
Director Grady.
No more questions right now, but thank you, everyone.
All right, well, thank you, team. I think that, it's extremely transparent. I appreciate that, and we all appreciate how transparent this process is, and the documentation, and the thoughtfulness, and I know I really trust this process. So it sounds like, there'll be a little follow-up, but thank you very much. All right, turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. Just one last comment as we're transitioning, give Anthony a moment to get ready to go here. I think the thread I wanted you to take away from those last few comments is for us to provide that level of certainty, we really do need to lock in what we're offering in 279 online now. And so to Director Simon's point, phase 2, year 2, we start thinking, how do we evaluate that first year and really kind of that core infrastructure? How do we begin to expand offerings and pathways? If you remember that presentation to the board around year 2 and year 3 as we begin to look at more options, but that first year, we got to lock in now so we can ensure staffing's, in the right place. So those course offerings now, we have to make those decisions, as Laura was saying now, so we give all of our staff the opportunities to either transfer or just to have certainty on their assignment, right? So, and then we evaluate, right? We go through that process of determining what do we need to do in year 2 and year 3 and beyond. So it's a little challenging to set those solidly in place in February, not knowing who's going to show up for sure in September, and that's why we have those contingencies in place. Moving target sometimes, but we try to do our best to forecast and then leave some room for adjusting. So with that, Anthony's here to talk more. I know you have some questions. Thank you for holding some of the questions. Some of you had some last week, and I did pass those on to Anthony and asked him to weave those into his presentation, so you've all been very patient with that.
My hope. Well, good evening, Chair Dawson Walton and school board members and Superintendent McIntyre. Tonight I get the pleasure of providing you an update of our DL4A, or Digital Learning for All plan. And with several new board members on here, I know there's maybe not as much of acquaintance of all the background behind this plan as some other board members. There is a lot of information in tonight's presentation. I am not going to go way in depth on all the slides, so please know I'm always available to have more conversation around our Digital Learning for All plan. And as all of you were onboarded in your onboarding packet as board members, there was a copy of our complete Digital Learning for All plan with the goals that are outlined in there, as well as timelines that are included as well. Our objectives for tonight is that you will be aware of the work happening with our DL4A priority work, and be aware and have the ability to provide some feedback on our elementary technology resource recommendation, which is just a component of our complete Digital Learning for All plan. The big idea or the vision behind what really drives our work with digital learning in our organization is this statement right here, that students will experience learning that is personalized in path, place, and pace through strengthening teaching and learning practices that support student success. And that was a very intentional statement that was created roughly 4 years ago as we went in depth to revise and review what our existing digital learning plan was that got implemented at the onset of our technology levy. At that time, it was really focused on technology resources and hardware and infrastructure. And as we've progressed and got that infrastructure and resources in, we needed to rethink where it is we're really going. So there's a lot of intentionality of removing technology at the front of the conversation and having conversations about what is it that we want for student outcomes and what are the instructional strategies that utilize technology as a resource to help us actualize those outcomes. These next two slides are just a brief outline of the implementation that's been occurring and the timelines that go with it. For board members that have been on longer, you will notice that there's an expansion of this timeline from when it was previously presented as we're starting to project out into the future. In 2017-18 is when we went through that large review process that involved parents, community members, students, and staff to understand where we have come and where we need to go. Starting in the school year of 18-19 is where we started with implementation of phase 1 at the high school, and we've been doing it very intentionally at grade bands so that we can maximize the resources that we have in our system to focus the efforts to ensure that we have the greatest impact. Last year we were focused at middle school, and this year, in the interesting mix of navigating through COVID-19 and distance learning and hybrid learning and switching models, has really been the implementation at elementary. The initial onset was really grades 3 through 5, with next year being a focus on K2, which is partially tied into what you see with the technology resource recommendation at the end of this presentation. As we look forward into next year and beyond, next year is really the last year or the 4th year of our implementation to really target that K through 2 band and get the resources in and additional professional development at the elementary level for the success of what we're doing with our DL4A plan. Once we move past next year, we're really moving into what we're calling our improvement cycles, or in our TeamWorks language, it would be our standard work. So we're going to be moving from implementation into standard work as part of our daily practice within our organization. The reason we have implementation cycles tagged on there is because we still want to cycle between high school, middle, and elementary as we're talking about refreshing technology resources, understanding the promising practices and instructional strategies that are having a high leverage impact in our classrooms, as well as focusing and targeting professional development that will support our staff at those different grade bands as we continue to move our work forward and evolve as technology evolves. So to give you an update on where we are in the larger plan, again, I've got a lot of slides here that I'm not going to spend a lot of time going in depth, but our large DL4A plan is actually broken down into 8 different categories that has goals around those categories. Those 8 areas include digital learning model, which is where we've spent the bulk of our time with our implementation, digital learning tools, digital citizenship responsibility use, professional development, parent and families, which is really about engagement and training of parents and families, business and community, how are we partnering and engaging in those aspects, technology resources, and then really assessment and measurement. How are we understanding the impact of what we're doing with digital learning and digital tools to have success with our students as we continue to move our mission forward? There is a logic model that Tom Watkins in the Teaching and Learning Department put together that kind of frames all the aspects that go into what we're doing as we're making decisions around technology resources and how we're framing our professional development. And really they kind of frame around district supports, building supports, teacher actions, parent engagement that really drive the impact or the student outcomes, which we align and measure based on those identified bullet points that are in this logic model. In the area of digital learning model, this is, again, as I said, where a bulk of our work has been in the implementation phase. It's really been identifying what it is for instructional practice and how do we align professional development to meet those instructional practices. We've done a variety of things around path, place, and pace. One of the ideas that I want to highlight in there is we've spent a lot of time around creating common language and definitions for teachers and look-fors to work with leaders within our system to understand what does path, place really mean and look like in a classroom setting. Those have been aligned specifically to UDL, which is understanding universal design for learning, as well as the ISTE student standards. In the area of digital learning tools, we've spent a lot of time trying to narrow down all the tools that exist. identified and clarified what are our core digital tools. So, some of that work has really been amplified as we've been in distance learning to navigate and declare Seesaw is our K through 5 learning management system. How do we streamline that for students, families, and our staff? Schoology is our core resource for 6 through 12 as a learning management system. Google Apps for education. Student view and parent view, how we use that engagement as a core tool and move our work forward. Digital citizenship and responsible use. We have worked around identifying resources such as Common Sense Media to provide with to staff and to media specialists around how they can engage students and build their capacity around digital citizenship and responsible use. We did do a large overhaul of our acceptable use policy 3 years ago as well to align with what we're doing in digital learning, as well as thinking on the back end of where students aren't necessarily engaging, but ensuring we're having digital security within the tools that we select. One of the things that we are now very intentional of is any system-wide tool that we purchase and engages with student data and student information, they have to agree to Osseo Area Schools Data Privacy Agreement and sign off on that. And Tim Palmatier and I engage in a lot of vendor conversations around negotiating contracts sometimes, specifically around that data privacy and ensuring that our students have that protection. We also have implemented a tool called Relay by Lightspeed. It is a web filtering tool that's aligned with Child Internet Protection Act because we do get E-rate funds. That was a tool intentionally brought in so we can filter our devices on campus and off campus. So as students are learning good responsible use and digital citizenship, we can put some guideposts in there to provide some of those added protections as well. Professional development, as I've talked, we have done a lot of repurposing and redeveloping of our professional development and some new intentionality over the last 3 years. Prior to 3 years ago, we provided a lot of professional development around digital learning tools and how to integrate technology, but it was always optional for teachers. So teachers were choosing into that. Where we flipped that 3 years ago is we built in required professional development and embedded professional development around our digital resources and tools within our system on our system professional development days. It was very unique as we were doing elementary this year, again, because of COVID being in place and distance learning. So typically what we did for the 2 years prior is we brought in all the high school staff and for a day in August in exchange for their system PD day in April, got them 4 hours of introductory training into our vision around path, place, and pace, how to use the digital tools in the classroom, and then there was systematic ongoing PD throughout the year. That same model was replicated at the middle school level. This year with distance learning in place, the one we've been doing our system level PD, pre-K through 12, teaching and learning department has been working very strategically to embed path, place, and pace in all the system PDs that they've been providing around how would you approach distance learning, hybrid, or in-person instruction that brings in those digital resources and core tools to the core of how we actually engage strategies that support students in the classroom. Parents and families, this is an area that we have recognized and we know we need to do more in because we've been so focused on implementation of our new vision of this plan. So as you will see back in the timeline, this is actually an area that's targeted for next year to really spend some time of some focused thought around this on how we continue to build out. But there have been some exciting things that have been continuing to move forward. Some of them have been on an onset because of COVID and realizing the resources we need to get to help support families. But there are also things that we are building the capacity for to continue because they're just great practices as we move forward. One of them that I want to highlight that we're really excited for is at Birch Grove Elementary, as part of their family engagement plan, we've been working with the Department of Educational Equity to create an in-person training PD session for families there on what are the digital resources, how do you use it, how do you log in, what does it mean for my student to go into Seesaw. We initially had it slated for January, but we had a weather cancellation, so it got rescheduled for February. We are using that as a pilot model to see what we can tweak and how we can potentially look at building this out system-wide in the future. Business and community, we've had a variety of different things going on there, from the implementation of our Osseo Technology Advisory Committee, which is made up currently right now of parents, community members, and staff. We would really love to get students engaged in this as well. So as we continue to build that and expand that out, looking at how we get multiple voices within that committee group to provide input and advisory. Digital Learning for All is one aspect of what that committee engages in. There's other pieces like cybersecurity, staff training, our technology infrastructure that we also review within that committee as well. So it's very holistic to technology and how we support technology in our system. Technology infrastructure and resources, again, this is probably what families and students see the most because it's really around the devices and hardware. And in the last 3 years, we have gone and implemented refresh cycles, as you saw in the executive summary that came to you beforehand. So as we were implementing these new devices over the last 3 years, we put student devices on a 3-year cycle based on what we knew of hardware at the time and what was the common trend with school districts who were using Chromebooks or iPads at the time. We have learned over the last 2 or 3 years that the hardware has improved and gotten better to where we can expand that to a 4-year cycle. So when we talk about the resource recommendation, we're able to move to a 4-year cycle with 3-year leases and keep the same budget capacity that we're currently using to fund 3 through 12 to add in the K through 12 without having to expand the financial resources to support that. Implementation of internet resources for family, again, onset of COVID. However, it is a built-in opportunity that we're taking advantage of how we move forward to, again, expand and help to diminish what I refer to as the digital poverty within our system to ensure that all students have equitable access to resources and can engage in what we're trying to do with our Digital Learning for All plan. And assessment and measurement, we've had a variety of different assessments to bring data points in, whether it's the engagement data that we've done through Relay, Schoology, and CISA that you've seen, promising practices data that we presented last year, and Filter Ed, which is a new assessment tool that we brought in this year. Been trying to figure out the best timing of getting this actually administered with all the pulse surveys going out and other surveys from other areas, knowing that there's survey and evaluation fatigue that can play into this. We did get one administration of this out to staff and students. We do have a planned administration for families later this spring. And as we kind of get more navigated out, we look at making it, we're going to be doing an annual evaluation using this Filter Ed tool. The nice thing about this Filter Ed tool, as I share kind of our big picture results, I'm not going to go real deep into these, is it gives us an ability to benchmark against other school districts in the state of Minnesota who are using this tool, as well as other school districts across the nation. So this tool actually has alignment to the ISTE student standards, administration standards, as well as COSN, which is a national network of school district technology administrators. So there's a lot of different standards that this is articulated and aligned to that we can really understand what impact we're having with the work that we're doing, besides the other data points that we collect with promising practices, MCA assessments, and FastBridge assessments, and so forth. The big areas are broken into leadership vision, resources, technology infrastructure, instruction and learning, practice and implementation, and learner impact. Each of these big bucket categories actually drill down into subcategories. We can actually break this out by employee groups. We can break this out by students, elementary, middle, and high. We do collect demographic. This is anonymous, but we do collect the demographic students if they choose to provide that. So we can actually break this out by demographics and how students are responding as well. So again, my team is starting to process through all the data that came in because we just got it back about 3 weeks ago. So we're excited to see where the scores have come in. This is really a benchmark year to baseline where we're at. So as we continue to administer this on a more regular basis, we can see where we're moving and growing and identify additional areas for improvement as we get into the improvement cycles. Specifically right now, we're digging into resources and instruction and learning, since they're the two categories that came in as the lowest, to see where are some potential easy places to start working on for next year. With that being said, when I benchmark us, we're doing pretty good with the work that we're doing and the way we're articulating it and being very strategic and methodical around it. When we look here, what you see in orange is the other school districts in Minnesota. There are 3 other school districts currently in Minnesota that are participating. As more school districts in Minnesota participate, we're going to get those scores built in that we'll continue to be able to benchmark on. And then we have 4 other states that we benchmark against in the national one. So districts in Missouri, Michigan, Kansas, and Texas all participate with this particular tool at this time to give us, again, some data just to understand where we're at, where are there areas of opportunity for growth and improvement as we move forward with our digital learning work. I did want to touch base quickly on promising practices. We will get an update to you after we get that processed. Promising practices is currently being conducted right now by the research and assessment team within teaching and learning. And once we gather all that data and get it correlated like we've done in the past, there's going to be some new metrics in there with looking at pulse survey data as well as attendance and course grades. And then we've got some of that learner engagement data that we've been able to bring in now with our students engaging in our digital systems more. Screen time, I quickly wanted to touch base on that we are continuing to evaluate and look at this and understand the impact of students being in front of screens and how we're using screens and being mindful and cognizant of that. As we're continuing to look at different studies and evidence out there, there's kind of this common theme that's coming out between active versus passive screen time use and really getting to how students are engaging with the technology. When we look at things that are engaged more with mental health or screen addiction, those are often tend to be more correlated towards passive use, social media use, things that aren't necessarily the driving factors behind how we would strategize and how we work with teachers to actually engage with that technology. When you look at where technology has been effective and has an impact, it's often around the active use and intentional engagement. So as we think about our professional development and how we're engaging staff around best practices in using technology and being mindful of the impact of screens on students, it really comes down to looking at the intentional purpose. Why are you using it? Having an intentional purpose behind it and having it add value behind why you're using it, which when we talk about adding value, we really want it to be enhancing learning that's aligned to outcomes. So having a student go on a device because you're getting a 5-minute break and you can kind of wander doesn't necessarily align to the standards or the outcomes that we want to see happening within that classroom. So really that intentionality behind that. Some added things to think about, and I won't dig into all of these, but really this came out of an article around positive impact seeing in early childhood literacy and really thinking about what does intentional use look like and how can we engage in different arenas, specifically looking at what does it look like when we're enhancing instruction, what does it look like when we're supporting equity and inclusion. As we talk about equity, the power of technology there to bring in diverse cultural perspectives in the classroom that we can't always get with a box curriculum. That's where technology can really add value into a classroom space. And then promote engagement. So there are some ideas of what it looks like when teachers are engaging with the technology to promote engagement. So elementary update. The first 2 slides in your packet, this is the recommendation that came forward to the board last February that we moved forward with and we're intending to implement and partially implemented prior to the pandemic occurring. So I'm going to use this in reference to at the very end what we're recommending so you can see the changes. There's only a few changes to what we actually recommended. So if we look at our current reality, so what we had moved forward with, what was budgeted for was a refresh of technology in 4th and 5th to move them to Chromebooks, which we had moved forward with RFPs to purchase those Chromebooks pre-pandemic, as well as a 2-to-1 ratio of iPads at the 3rd grade level. When the pandemic hit, we knew we needed to have resources in order to engage all students in learning. We were very fortunate that we were moving forward and we've had these refresh cycles going to be able to shift some of our resources that would have been retired to support what we were doing in the K-2 space. So what we're looking at now is we've got new devices 1-to-1 currently in grades 3 through 5. We bought the other half of the 3rd grade devices with CARES funding to supplement that, to create that as a 1-to-1. And we actually bought new iPad devices to support many of the VPK classrooms, so pre-K had access to one-to-one technology. We then took the devices that were coming back from both the teacher laptop distribution as well as the third grade, or the fourth grade and fifth grade and third grade replacement devices to be able to repurpose at our K through 2 level. We've been kind of going through this cycle that we've gotten to the age where Apple is retiring a lot of these hardwares. So the fleet we were using in the spring, half of that fleet actually had to permanently be retired because Apple stopped supporting them and they became a security risk. So what we have left in our system is the last of the Apple Air 2s that as of next October, Apple is going to stop supporting them. So we know we either have to replace them or we need to just say we're not going to have those resources anymore, which is going to lead to where we're looking at with our recommendation. Again, we also repurposed some of those older iPads in some pre-K spaces. ECSE is one of the spaces where we were working with to get some devices in that space as well. So when we look at the technology resource recommendation, and again, I'm being very cognizant that there's a lot more to DL4A and the elementary package when we talk about instructional strategies and practice and how we're implementing. This is really just a recommendation of the technology to support what we want to have happen in the classroom. This recommendation that we're bringing forward and modifying is based on a lot of layers. So one is last year's elementary study. We spent a lot of time last year engaging teachers and students and running pilots and collecting a lot of data to understand what hardware was best to support at different levels, which is where you see Chromebooks at 4th and 5th and iPads at K through 3 was in the recommendation last year. That same technology is still the recommendation moving forward based on spending time and piloting technology in the classroom and understanding what they were trying to accomplish that aligned with path, place, and pace and our digital learning plan in order to achieve that. The other components that came in as we look at this in particular from our COVID response, as we have navigated distance learning and learned from our COVID response, the need to have the technology, infrastructure, hardware, and resources on hand to be able to be agile and nimble and respond quickly is highly important. Hopefully, we're going to get through this pandemic and not have to navigate and go back into a distance learning model and try and ramp everything up. However, what we've learned through being agile is this provides us with added opportunities. Cold weather days, we can't do e-learning days at the elementary level if we don't have the resources there for the students to engage with at home. If we think about a potential facility failure, so a few years ago, Northview Middle School had to close down for a day because they had a water line break. So when we talk about disruption of our learning and our learning calendar, having the technologies on hand in a one-to-one fashion all the way down to K allows us to continue to move and rethink and engage in learning that goes beyond just our four walls within the classroom. The other items in there when we think about budget considerations, so again, as we frame this out through K through 12 in the executive summary, kind of shared all of this funding would come through our existing technology levy capacity and is not adding capacity by us changing to 4-year cycles on devices while keeping the same 3-year lease cycles on technology. So we would refresh a group of technology, put them on a 3-year cycle. We would have 1 year where we're not paying for them anymore before we would refresh those devices. Right now, we currently have about 9.5 grades on a 3-year lease, kind of staggered between the 3. Stretching it out to a 4-year cycle, we'll be able to keep 9 grades in that cycle by expanding that out to work within the existing budget capacity. Support resources, we talked about a little bit as well, looking at bringing in an additional tech support specialist level 2 and 4 additional tech ESPs to support this expansion that's occurring with our K through 12. Tech resource access, again, I've addressed a lot of these. And so our elementary recommendation, this is in bullet points. I'm going to move to the graphic to kind of show what changed from last year to this year. So wherever you see green, that is where the recommendation is changing. So 3rd grade is a recommendation of 1-to-1 iPads. It was previously 2-to-1 iPads. 1-to-1 iPads is currently what's being implemented with DL4A or with our distance learning program, and we purchased all new iPads at the 3rd grade level. Interactive displays, we had across the board that they would be implemented pre-K through 5. We want to take another year to reevaluate that. Now that we're changing the technology that teachers and students have access to, we want to spend some more time to understand, now that you have one-to-one in your classroom, is the interactive display still as valuable as you thought it was when you were only getting 6 iPads in your classroom? So trying to figure out the new combination and need. Pre-K across the board, we've got that as a reevaluation state. So again, trying to re-understand now that we've gone through COVID and distance learning and trying to do pre-K in a new format, are there new needs? Are there different needs than what we had previously recommended? So really taking a year to re-engage that conversation and understand how we move forward. With that, I will pause for any questions and feedback.
Thank you. I will start with Director Grady.
Thank you very much for all the work that you're doing to make sure that our families and our students have the access to the best technology possible and learning how to use it responsibly as we move forward into this increasingly digital economy. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what gaps remain within the district in terms of hardware devices, or more importantly, internet access and like quality internet access, not just a hotspot. What work do we still have to do for that?
Yeah, so there's, I call it the short-term and the long-term goal. So I think we've got a really good short-term strategy in place, and we've been able to, any family who's having internet deficiencies, you know, as soon as we identify them, we're able to have conversations and get them connected through our hotspot program. Our hotspot program, to me, is really a short-term solution. It works, but it's not necessarily, I'm getting a good, internet connection into my home. What I will say is our hotspots that we're purchasing, actually, it's a pretty good quality hotspot. And if you think about it, it's probably got the same bandwidth as an Internet Essentials connection, because Comcast throttles that down pretty low. So, you kind of have a comparable speed there. When you think about the high-speed internet connection, you got to take into consideration how much bandwidth you're actually getting from somebody who could provide you a gig, but is only giving you 5 megabytes worth of internet connectivity to your home. So that's the program that we have in place that we're going to continue with moving into next year. We've been able to, again, as I said, any family who has identified needing internet support, we've been able to support them with that hotspot, and we still have available hotspots if family situations change, and we're ready to go with that. Some of the longer term pieces is looking at partnerships as well as legislation. So, our legislative platform includes work around broadband access. I know the governor has been very upfront around work around broadband access. I'm also part of the Minnesota Association of School Administrators and their technology component group. We have broadband access in our legislative platform as well. So there's a legislative component of trying to figure out how we get better connectivity. And then, locally, looking at different groups that we can partner with. So one of the partnerships in the city and community that you saw in the presentation, I didn't necessarily pull it out and highlight it, but we're currently working with the city of Brooklyn Park. With their CARES funding, they're actually doing a partnership with Xfinity to bring in Xfinity connections into homes that may need them within the city of Brooklyn Park. So why I don't say we automatically give a hotspot, we typically get the student in, we see what resources are available. If it makes sense because they're a Brooklyn Park resident, we might refer them and work with the city of Brooklyn Park to get them connected that way, because it's a little more secure connection, as well as, again, looking for additional partnerships and avenues. Last year in the springtime, we had a lot of conversations going with Comcast and with different city partners and with Hennepin County around looking at different areas and different opportunities to bring in. I think we've all been kind of caught in the minutia of navigating this year, and we haven't engaged in as many of those conversations because we've gotten the short-term solution in, but they're still on the radar of, the cities and county and Hennepin County as I've engaged with them, as to re-engage those conversations again when we get a moment to breathe.
Great, thank you. Does that expansion of internet access, you said it talked about coming up with a partnership between Brooklyn Park and Xfinity going into homes. Does that also include a plan to handle some of our apartment building issues?
I can't speak to that. I know the city of Brooklyn Park has engaged in some conversations with our apartment complexes. I was engaged with Brooklyn Park and some of our apartment complexes and Xfinity last year to try and find some solutions that we hit some stalled roadblocks on. Not necessarily that there couldn't be a solution there, but the timing of getting that in and how much time students weren't getting connected to internet kind of paused the button on that. We know which apartment complexes we're going to have the greatest impact on for our students. The city of Brooklyn Park knows that, and so does Hennepin County. We've been engaging in a multifaceted conversation around where those needs are. Some of those apartment complexes in particular don't just serve us, they also serve Robbinsdale and Brooklyn Center. So there's a greater impact if we look at a multi-partnership to try and support, students across our area that need greater access. The conversations I've had with Hennepin County in particular, I think there's a recognition as the conversation keeps going to the legislature as well, that broadband internet access is more than just our students. If we think about our county services, state services, social services, even mental health providers and medical provider access is all moving to online formats. And, to a certain degree successfully, as long as you have the internet connectivity. So now it really becomes around digital equity and how we ensure that everyone has the equitable and equal access to at least the baseline resources to connect to, whether it's education, county, state, or city supports.
Well, thank you. I've also been in some of those meetings talking about some of our deficiencies with internet access in those areas, and we had the same sort of complex roadblocks. So, I'd love to follow up with you again on that later. My other question before I pass it on is, I love the idea of the Birch Grove program, the pilot program, to really include our families, because this digital revolution that's also happening at the same time of the pandemic is also complicated for adults. And I think, all of us can use some tech support. So I'm wondering, when you do this program, how soon do you think you'll be able to expand that pilot program into our other locations?
That's a good question. I don't have a great answer for you right now. So we wanted to get the first one off the ground to see how it works and what it looks like and what resources went into it and how we expand that in the future. So to be determined and more to come.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Director Brooks.
I first want to say thank you for being responsive to the questions that I had previously. I thought I had more questions, but you answered almost all of them, so thank you. One of the things I was hoping to hear more on was the single sign-on. I know that there was a slide on here about education or training for parents or for families, and I feel like a significant chunk of that could be spent on how to sign into all of the various systems. So just wondering if you could talk about the timeline for that. I know that it was included in the budget request earlier today as well. So
I'm glad you saw that. So that has been a project waiting to hit the road going since I got started here. So and I know even prior to me coming on, there had been conversations around a single sign-on solution. So we actually know what the solution is going to be. We know what we need to get implemented. So it's really waiting for the budget capacity to come behind it starting July 1. We'll be in, again, if the board approves the budget, then we will start engaging in those conversations and road mapping the project so that come July 1, we can get a single sign-on. It's kind of a twofold. It's single sign-on and it's identity automation. So while a lot of employees and students think that a lot of great things happen automatically behind the scenes, it's actually, we still have a pretty manual file transfer process that comes out of one system and into other systems. And thank goodness I have a fabulous information systems team led by Gerald Edwards, who's got some phenomenal database integration developers there that can do some of that work. But as we look at how do we get better and more efficient, we knew that single sign-on was an identity automation is something that we really had to get in the works. So, roadmap-wise, we anticipate to hopefully have students and staff into that single sign-on solution by the start of next school year. And then we've got kind of a longer-term vision of what does it mean to actually create parent accounts within Active Directory and probably get them into single sign-on. It's going to take a little more work because they're not currently in our infrastructure, but reviewing what that means and how that looks. So again, from family to student to employee, how do we make login more efficient and effective with the multiple systems we engage with?
Thank you. All I can say on that is I can't wait.
Amen.
And then really one of the only other questions I had, maybe it's two, you already sort of alluded to this, but the ability to use the one-to-one devices on snow days or cold weather days. So I was kind of curious what our plans were for that. I know we haven't really had any snow days yet this year, thank goodness, but yeah, just kind of what the timeline is to sort of implement that. And then you have one more sort of related follow-up to that.
So it's already in place for cold weather days. So we implemented 6 through 12 e-learning, and then we expanded it down to K this year with having the one-to-one devices now in place. We've been navigating kind of the unique nuances around that. So if you're a school district that's in distance or you're running a hybrid model, you don't actually need to do an e-learning day. You can just do a distance learning day as part of your distance learning or hybrid model. For our elementary sites, we do have to actually enact an e-learning day, which is driven by statute. So school districts can use 5 e-learning days for inclement weather. And so we're working around the guidelines and structures around and guidance for what specifically that means for elementary. Reality is for elementary staff, it's a distance learning day. There's some logistical reporting nuances that we have to call it an e-learning day, but in terms of how staff would engage and interact, it would be like moving back to distance learning for a day. We're currently working with EMO around updating our MOU. So we had an MOU that was in place prior to the last e-learning day that went for 6 through 12. We're re-navigating that language to be kind of updated with current practices from what we learned last year, as well as being inclusive of all of our employees pre-K-12.
Director Brooks, it snowed on Easter last year. We got plenty of opportunity for inclement weather.
Thank you. And then, yeah, the last question I had was around summer learning. So I know that this is a concern every summer for families and even a greater need this year. And so just wondering if we've started to sort of envision what summer learning could potentially look like, having one-to-one devices and potentially having those devices at home during the summer.
Yeah, so we have just started conversations around that. I know building principals are working on plans on what that may look like. In terms of technology and technology resources, we've started to think about that and process through that. Historically, we have always provided the one-to-one technologies for students that are enrolled in our summer programming. So that's not new to what we've done in our operations. What might be new is the volume of summer programming that might occur this year, as well as kind of that expansion all the way down in a larger number. What was different last summer is we provided an additional opportunity that if a student wasn't enrolled in one of our summer programs, that they could request to check out a device to use for whatever. So, we've been kind of evaluating what we learned last summer and trying to process through what that means and how we support that and the resources that are available. In particular, when we're looking at really 6 grade levels worth of new technology coming in this summer that my core team has got to get up and ready to go for next fall. And we've also got all those devices we have to collect back to retire before the school year starts as well. So there's some big projects that we got to navigate around. But technology is on the front of our minds. So even if it's in-person summer programming, there's still value for the technology resource and access there and just navigating what that means and how we support that.
So I appreciate that. I think one of that question was also geared toward those students that may not be in a summer program, but still have that device at home. It's nice to have that option to have the device at home, but what uses the device if there isn't a learning component attached to that, some sort of learning plan, something to tie them over until that following school year. So I just think as we're being creative about tackling some of the academic disparities in the district, it would be nice to put together some sort of plan to hold our students over through summer, and also start to look at what potential budget implications would be for expanding that.
And there would definitely be some curricular resources that already exist that a student could utilize. Again, we'd have to think about what targeted programming looks like, but iExcel is something that we've purchased and have a year-long subscription to. New ZLA is another district-wide subscription that we've purchased as of recently. So there are some learning tools that could potentially be engaged if there's a well-rounded plan that's going with it.
But thank you for all of your work on this.
All right, thank you, Director Mosqueda-Jones.
Thank you. I'm really excited about our direction. Just to follow up on Director Brooks's comments and questions about summer programming, iExcel is a pretty amazing program, and I'm wondering if we can provide some parent education for parents before summer comes on how to utilize that for children, especially, and including in different languages. That's something that we might think about.
Yeah, that's something we can definitely bring back to the team and have ongoing conversations about, again, as we think about comprehensively, what does summer programming look like?
Right, and maybe we can, I know last summer I did some volunteer tutoring with the Organization of Librarians of Minnesota, and so if we can do some collaboration with some of our agencies in the area, I think that might be helpful. I'm also super excited about the single sign-on. And I'm assuming that we'd be able to do like a QR code for the younger kids for the
Yes.
single sign-on? Okay.
Yep, so the solution that we're bringing in does have a QR code reader. We have, somewhat of a single sign-on solution at the elementary for some of the programs that does have a QR code reader capability that we haven't necessarily utilized. But as we do a strategic implementation, yes, the tool we're bringing in does have that capacity.
What's the name of the tool?
It's called OmniID. It's a program that was written specifically for schools and as a single sign-on solution, and many districts in the metro area utilize that.
Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Simons.
No questions. Again, very great presentation. Just covered a lot of material, and I know there's so many more questions that we could ask, and I always ask because what you're doing is, I would say, innovative. Since you've been in your role, I've really appreciated that you guys are always thinking ahead in your department, and that's proven to bear fruit for us this year. So just like our finance department, like having these really good anchor departments that are foundational, just so well positions us for everything that needs to be done in the classroom. So I'm so appreciative of all of the work that you do, the creative ideas that you bring forward, the speed with which you implement, you and your teams, just really exciting stuff. So it's a great update, and I don't have any questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Douglas.
I do have a few questions. I'm going to just go back to the beginning because I wrote them down in order as I was looking at the presentation. Let's see, I think my first question was, I wanted to make a comment on the, I wrote this on the wrong thing, but the group that you have, what is it called?
Osseo Tech Advisory Group.
Yes, thank you. I strongly encourage you to recruit students to be a part of this. I know that you mentioned that you wanted to do it, but I just wanted to encourage that further. DPAC actually used to have students in it, and that's another thing where I feel like we need to get students back because their voice in these particular arenas is so critical. They're the ones that are using the devices day in and day out. So I just think that that's a really great idea, and I just wanted to comment on that. I had questions about the filter ed, but you answered them through your presentation. I wanted to touch on screen time. I know that we've talked about this many times. A question that I had is about the passive use, and where does, or do we know, when students are viewing, like a teacher giving a presentation, or even a pre-recorded teacher presentation, does that fall into passive use because they're just sitting there watching it like they would be watching TV, or does that fall into active use because they're gaining information about what they should be learning?
That's a great question that, I haven't seen a particular delineation calling either of those out, from, what I would understand best is I think they would view watching a teacher and gaining information as more the active use than the passive use, because typically passive use is connected with entertainment viewing, again, but they haven't gone down specific to say watching an instructional video is passive use, because, there's a lot of instructional TV programming out there as well. So, again, I haven't seen anything to give me a tight articulation on that. That's just kind of my best understanding right now.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, have we evaluated yet, or do we have any statistical information about how teachers are giving instruction through the technology? And what I mean by that is, when a teacher does a Google Meet with their student and they spend, up to 40 minutes instructing, then how much are they also directing students to use the technology to complete assignments? So are we including all of that? How is that all included in the screen time usage? And are certain grades or content areas using more screens than others?
Yeah, I think that is going to be some great information that we'll learn more on as the promising practices study gets completed, because that's really going to dig into some of the strategies and how teachers have been engaging in the learning. I know anecdotally, as doing a lot of observation and engagement, in particular with the DLA, we see a wide variety of different strategies occurring, and where we're anecdotally hearing where there's some good things happening. We're seeing teachers that will be in a Google Meet, and then they'll bring up a Jamboard, and then they'll put students into breakout rooms to have small group conversations, and then come back, potentially direct them to go do something, shut off their screen, go do an activity, and then come back into the screen. So it's definitely anecdotally where we're seeing just some individual case positive examples. You're seeing multifaceted use of the technology as opposed to just opening up a Google Meet and providing, instruction that could be watched within a video if it was pre-recorded.
Sure. Okay, thank you. A little bit more on screen time is that I know that we have a lot of inconsistencies across our district, grade levels, content areas. So do we have a plan to develop more consistency based off of the promising practices information that we gather? Are we forward thinking about how will we use that information to develop better PD for our teachers so that they're more effectively using the technology?
So I would say yes, and that's already been in place. So when we look at the promising practices study we brought forward last year, everything that was showing positive results were the specific strategies that we were providing within professional development. So the strategies that we're identifying and bringing in for teachers to build the menu of options. So, there's this balance of too tight of consistency that, we're trying to get to one shoe fits all within the classroom versus high leverage practices that, depending on your classroom students and makeup, this strategy might work better than this strategy, but knowing what those strategies are and aligning professional development around that. So that work continues to happen as we work through the promising practices data and we learn what is working and what's not working as we continue our PD within our system.
Thank you. And my last thing on screen time is that anecdotally, we've heard from families who are struggling. their kids are staring at the computer screen and banging their heads on the table or crying or just shutting down altogether. How are we using that information to better serve our families?
I think, the first thing that comes to mind is really when I talk about that category of parent and family engagement and support and PD, is that there's opportunities for us to, there's the one arena of how to help parents understand what it is that students are doing with their technology, how are they using their technology, how do you support your student with the technology, as well as how do you balance that if it's at home. I think sometimes when I engage some families in conversations, they don't necessarily know what it is the student should be engaging with or how they're navigating, and that's part of the frustration, because as a parent or guardian, they can't necessarily put the parameters around what it is that's occurring while that device is at home, where, as we think about moving forward, how do we equip families, parents, and guardians with the information around what is the use of the technology? How should it be used? How can you balance that out when it's in an at-home perspective? And oftentimes really encouraging parents and guardians to have conversations with the teacher, saying, what should my kid actually be doing with it when this device comes home? Because that's not always known as well.
Thank you. Okay, so when we're talking about the digital resource recommendations and how they've changed to increase the digital resources and quantity per student ratio, you mentioned that would better serve our students if we had to use an e-learning day, for example, a cold weather day. However, I noticed that a lot of these devices at our lower grade levels, all the way up to 5th grade, are classroom-only devices. So most of the time, we can't predict that. So how, can you address that for me?
Yep, so that's where we're going to have, again, some ongoing conversation about how we navigate what that looks like. So again, the primary function is to keep those resources at school, but that may look like during winter weather months, maybe we have those devices going home. Or if we know we're going to have a cold week, devices go home during that week. Or we know we might have a snow event, we send devices home. I use the example of my kids who are in Robbinsdale right now, and they're back to school full-time like our elementary students. The teachers had the kids bring their devices home because of a potential cold weather day to make sure that those devices were coming back and forth. So there's ongoing conversation around what that would look like to support that flexibility in terms of inclement weather or getting resources into the hands of students and what that would mean for next year. This school year, we want the devices going back and forth because the fact is we could have a student that needs to go into quarantine for 14 days the very next day. What this turns out to be as we get back into normal operations, again, is going to have to be an ongoing conversation as to what is realistic and how we manage it and support everything that we want to do.
Is having a device at home a requirement of e-learning?
Yes, it is. If you
Like, I guess what I'm asking is in statute.
It is not, MDE's interpretation of that statute is that students would need to have technology at home in order to participate in an e-learning day.
Okay, so I guess, so if we didn't have, let's say we have like a elementary school and one teacher in the elementary school forgets to have her kids take their devices home, does that class not get to do e-learning or the whole school site? Like, I guess there's nuances, right? So do we have a way to still provide e-learning if a situation were to occur like that?
That's one of the nuances we're going to have to continue to explore and investigate and understand what that means if something like that could occur.
Okay. I had another question, actually. This was earlier on when you were talking about the safety of when we're using other apps. And can you just elaborate more on that? So what I took away from that, because it was a really quick, brief slide, is that if we have an app in self-service and our kids' teacher directs them to download it to use it for whatever purpose in the classroom, that child is then protected, like their identification and things like that is protected because we have contracts with those vendors or app servicers, I don't know what they're called, developers, I don't know. Is that true?
Yes, so we've put particular measures in place. We've got kind of a document that categorize out for staff around software use and app usage. And we actually have 3 tiers. So a tier 3 is the system tools that we buy as a district, that we pay for, that supports all schools and programs. So Synergy, Schoology, Seesaw, Google Apps for Education. Those we all have a negotiated contract with. We also have our district data privacy agreement signed with those vendors as well. Our tier 2 applications are site-specific applications that they may have purchased. So some buildings, before we had IXL system-wide, there were some sites that had used their building budgets to purchase IXL to support what they were doing curricularly. If a site goes to purchase a software solution or an app, that actually runs through the same data privacy agreement process that our tier 1 district level applications. Tier 3 applications are the whole onslaught of free tools that are out there that we have a lot of extreme caution around before staff are using them. The requirement is that before a staff uses it, that they have engaged their site leader around that so that their site leader knows that they're using that. And they have to notify the parents that that tool is going to be used, as well as give families the option, if they don't want to participate in that tool, that they don't have to log in and participate in that tool. We do not have very many of those applications where a student would need to sign in. That's kind of in that tier 3 space. Most of them are vetted and paid for at a building level or a district level for those protections. The iPad apps that we have, or the apps, we don't have very many Chrome Android apps that we use, but we have that capacity in the Chromebooks. Those go through an app approval process where the app committee actually reviews the privacy policy to make sure it's in alignment with what we expect around student data privacy and protection as well. So before those get downloaded and go into self-service, they do go through a vetting process before we allow them to get onto a student device.
Okay, that helps a lot. I had another question about that, but I kind of forgot what it was. So I'll have to come back to you later, I think.
Okay.
But thank you.
I just have to say, it's this is so great because I just kind of put my parent hat on too, and having multiple students in this district in the single sign-on solution, because let me tell you, there have been days of tears for me because I can't figure out the passwords. So that's great.
I promise it's going to be absolutely perfect next fall, but it's going to start rolling out
next
next
fall.
fall.
Better be perfect, Anthony. No, I was kidding. And I think even talking about screen time, obviously during this pandemic, it's been really, I think, a struggle. And not even on our devices, but I think just general, kind of that Birch Grove model or the pilot around just bringing families in to just talk about the different sites and resources. And and just like Seesaw, I've grown to really not like Seesaw before. I was like, what is, so I think that's going to be really, really important to, so that we're all kind of, we all are able to really support our students to do that. So, and the only question I had, and Dr. Douglas asked it, was I was a little confused about, because I know my younger girls keep their devices at school, so I was just wondering about how that works with the snow days, so. All right, does anybody have anything else? It kind of looks like everybody's done. All right, so I will
Chair
hand it over
Dawson,
to.
just a couple comments. I just wanted to give Anthony and his team another round of accolades because a couple things that have really shown up for us this year, we thought were a good idea at the beginning, and it really, I think, has panned out to be true. When we developed the Distance Learning Academy, there are many districts that full year distance learning teaching falls on the classroom teacher in addition to their in-person learning, and in a hybrid model, those distance learning days, that third prong is on them as well. We only have those first two because we chose to separate that and staff it separately, which has had its own challenges, but really has been a really good thing for us, allowing classroom teachers to stay focused on their class and not that additional group of students that chose the year-long option. And as time has marched on, we were one of the few that did go down that path early on, make that kind of bold commitment early on. And that was at the time when we were trying to get 10,000 devices out to learners in the matter of, felt like hours, but it was days and weeks in the spring. And then I remember the conversations, we were trying to decide, how do we get all those back and clean them up and do the maintenance on them and prevent $1 million loss of devices never coming back. You know, there's a budgetary piece there too we're working through, and those are all real-time things that all of you were a part of those conversations. And we've navigated all that. So the tremendous amount of learning that's gone with it. And lastly, the foresight to front-load staff development for our teachers. Like Monday was our last PD day for the year. Meaning we took those spring days and put them on the front end of the school year, saying let's really front load as much as we can for our staff to, in conjunction with our curriculum department, how do we best launch a really, really effective, you know, the expertise of our teachers. I'm on that professional development slide and I made the note here that we committed to that on the front end instead of that expertise coming in May, you know, April. So I think that was a wise choice too, to have the foresight to look ahead and try to do as best we can to have as much impact early when we're and that came to be really important because we moved into distance learning in November and we were there for a while. So that really did help. So I just want to give Anthony and his team and the level of collaboration between departments, along with this at its core, the focus on learning and instruction, and not so much the devices themselves, but how they're used for learning. And you touched on that at the beginning, Anthony. You know, I've seen it too many times where it's all about the devices and the tech, and not so much about the teaching and learning. And we've flipped that paradigm with this plan that you're now in year 4 of. So, you know, I wasn't here at the beginning of it, but I've loved how the board has supported staying the course on this through some challenging times. And I'd stack it up against anybody's plan around the metro, honestly. So just a tremendous amount of support. And when I'm looking for Anthony, he's always talking with one of our other administrators, other team members about how do we integrate this. So it's not a silo. It's how do we embed it in what we're already doing when it comes to serving students. So hopefully you saw those themes show up in the presentation and the thoughtfulness that has gone into this, and really listening to our staff about what do they need. Because that's ever changing. It's been rapidly developing. So thank you, Anthony, for your support and the collaboration you've done with all of our other leaders and our building leaders too. You're constantly in the principals meetings. You're constantly in front of teachers trying to figure out how we do this better. So thank you very much for that. So I just got a couple of wrap-up comments. I know you're probably looking to adjourn soon.
Can I jump in real quickly?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just
Anthony.
wanted to throw this up just for foreshadowing. It's in the last slide. Because there will be actions coming. So, you know, the board approves the budget at end of February, as we talked about earlier. That'll kick off a lot of starting a conversation about technology procurement and contracts, you know, acquisition of needed hardware. And if there are any technology bids, you will be seeing those come most likely in March. So just kind of laying out some of those timelines. Thank you.
I have to say one more visual that just sticks in my head is the line of cars coming through the ESC for families that get their devices, pick them up. And the same number of team members that we didn't add any support, you know, to the department. They were able to repurpose how they work and rethink how they do their jobs. So it was a complete reimaging of how we support from our tech department. So just another example of the many, many things that have happened over the course of the last year. Board members, I just wanted to kind of make a couple closing comments. You know, a lot of very thoughtful comments and insightful questions tonight. So thank you for that. It really helps us when you are, I asked, please read ahead, prepare for tonight, because there was so much information and it showed. So thank you very much for that. And just a lot of complex issues here that we're working through. And I want to commend you on your comments and questions tonight. And I know you have more, right? I know that you only scratch the surface. Please funnel them to me or to the department leaders so that we can get that information back. And oftentimes your question is one that the other board members have as well. So I'm really thinking of, if I get one from one of you, I might need to provide that to everyone because you often have similar questions with that. So with that in mind, please continue to review your notes and funnel those to us so you feel like you're fully informed as we move into the next few meetings and as you're making some decisions. So with that, Chair Dawson Walton, thank you for letting me kind of wrap that up.
Yeah.
hand it back
What?
to you.
Yeah, we had solid presentations and a really productive discussions tonight, so. All right, with that, this work session is adjourned at 8:57 PM. Have a great night.